This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. That was quite easy, wasn't it? That little pop quiz at the end of Nick's show that I treated you to. Alan writes, was it the Fagash Fiora? Another texter, Guy, writes, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it was the frog-faced traitor. James asks, was it beery flatulence made flesh? And John in Leeds says, was it fromage? I don't know who you're referring to. I was talking about Nigel Farage. Is he still leader of Reform? I think he is, although there is a little trouble at the mill, who has very recently described himself as part of the same phenomenon as Andrew Tate, which may explain why, part of the reason why I haven't really delved into this phenomenon as deeply as I should have done. Look, nobody's perfect. Sheila has played a blinder on this. Sheila has been across it really from the moment it became clear that this man poses a very real and present threat to our youth. And I wonder if that's because she's a woman. I wonder if it is because misogyny is obviously going to land much more heavily in the life of a woman than it is in the life of a man. Even, and I don't like this phrase, but sometimes it is pertinent, it is relevant, even as the father of teenage daughters. And there's a problem here as well. Could you imagine if after the hideous Southport murders, I had come on air aware of some of the material that killer had watched and sought to do a phone-in show about why it is so appealing, or worse, perhaps, whether it is, almost flirting with the question of whether or not he had a point. Do you feel some of these grievances too? You're talking about a radicalised killer, really, if misogyny has played a part in this case, as it would appear it has done. You're talking about someone who has a propensity to violence. Plenty of people who've watched Andrew Tate are not going to end up committing anything like the crimes that Kyle Clifford committed, but he watched loads and loads of videos of Tate before murdering his ex-girlfriend, her sister, and their mother, Hannah, Carol, and Louise, to give them their names, Hannah, Carol, and Louise Hunt. And I don't know why I'm so conscious of that. I really am. I don't want to use glib phrases, but goodness me, what is the difference between two killers? In that when one of them, when we learn more about what may have motivated one of them, we start asking questions about whether or not it is in any way comprehensible, in any way understandable. And I know what you're doing when you say this to me. You say, why don't you approach this topic with an open mind and hear from the kids that are listening to this guy? Whenever I've seen him, he comes across as I may need some asterisks for that. So I can't see the attraction. So what is it? I can't do that today. I mean, I may do it on another occasion, but you're kind of moving, not today when we're talking about a hideous, murderous rampage undertaken by someone who'd been mainlining content produced by this man, accused currently of rape, sex trafficking and money laundering. Obviously, he doesn't appear on screen and start extolling the benefits of raping, money laundering and sex trafficking, although from what I've seen and from what I understand, he walks a very, very, very careful tightrope. But I don't think that's part of the process today. I'll tell you what George said as he hears about 3 women being murdered by a man who is steeped in misogyny. George says, oh, here we go again, misogyny, the most overused word for the last 2 decades. And it is people like George who I need to keep off my switchboard today because they don't inform us or advance our understanding of anything except what it's like to be a misogynist, what it is like to hate women, and to hate the idea that women are victims of a peculiar and particular bigotry, a particular and peculiar form of hatred. It's there. So I think on another day, we will have a look at the question of why the soil in our society is so fertile for this grievance of this bogus, this grievous of narrative of bogus victimhood and bogus grievance. It's why Farage is actually right when he says they're part of the same phenomenon. It's about telling people that they're victims of some terrible conspiracy and the people to blame are over there, whether it's foreigners or asylum seekers or lawyers or Muslims or, in this case, women. You are victims of women. So who are the best people to talk to today? The best people to talk to today are, well, it's you, actually, as a woman. Someone who can tell me. That teacher towards the end of Nick's show was right on the money, wasn't she? Someone who is actually in a position to tell me and everybody listening to this program what it is like to track an increase in misogyny. You know I'm obsessed with pendulums, or pendular, if you wanted to be pedantic about the Latin. I'm obsessed with the idea that society is in a constant process of ebb and flow, and that we move to one extremity and then we start swinging back towards the other. And for about 27 minutes, the pendulum is in exactly the right place where it should be before it starts moving away again. You can see it in so many areas of life. Some of them serious, some of them less so. One of the most serious, of course, is bodily autonomy. It is abortion. Many people felt that the Roe versus Wade ruling in the US Supreme Court was the sort of end of the conversation. It was the end of the issue, that the world had changed forever. But, of course, we saw not long ago that the pendulum even there can swing back, and a self-confessed sex offender can make appointments to a Supreme Court that will undo a legal precedent designed to protect the bodily autonomy of all women, even victims of rape. Ironically enough, 10 minutes after 10 is the time. So it is, I think, only women that can tell me this. It's only women that can answer this question. And the question is, how do you know that misogyny's got worse? What are the warning signs? When did your alarm bells start ringing? I mean, in many ways, if you're dealing with your own teenage boy, I don't want to say that we've swerved this as a family. 2 reasons, really. I try not to talk about the family on air since the children reached an age where their school or university friends might actually be listening. But even if I did, then on this occasion I would be able to say it's not something that's popped up in their world. It's not something they've brought to me. At risk of sounding like a Victorian father, all the young men that my daughters have brought into our home have been charming, not just to me, but in their dealings with them. And if there have been any other kind of conducts or behaviours, they have not been misogynistic. It is not something that has beeped on my radar. And that's not a question of privilege. You know, it's nothing to do with the kind of schools they went to, unless it's the all-girls element, because these things flourish in plenty of private schools. It's by no means a class-distinct phenomenon. The Me Too movement threw up examples of appalling misogyny and sexual assault in some of the most expensive schools in the country. So it's not there that any of the answers lie. What I would like to know is what has happened to you as a woman that first alerted you or alerts you now to the fact that vile misogyny, the portrayal of women as being lesser, as being inferior, as being objects. That's, forgive me again for wondering for a little while what objectify meant when it couldn't be simpler, could it? You literally reduce a human being to an object to do with what you will. When did you as a woman notice that the conversation and the conduct were changing? That's what I need to know. And I need to say something a bit specific to the medium with which we communicate every morning. This is not, well, look, I'm not going to say any names because it wouldn't really be fair, but if I wanted to go to a call now, I could, but it would be a man. And they may well have something helpful to say, or they may be moaning about the fact that feminism has gone too far. I don't know. But the way radio phone-in works, I've told you this before, and I'm going to tell you it again. The way radio phoning works is a reflection of how our society is structured. Some people may not like the word patriarchy, but it's the only one that fits. Men think, listening to this, that they have more of a right to ring in than women do. Even on a subject when I say, don't ring me if you're a man, I'll get half a dozen texts complaining. But I want to hear from women about what it is like to be on the receiving end of misogyny in a way that is worse than it was 10 years ago or even 20 years ago, because in many ways it makes no sense, does it? You know, we've had conversations about why wolf whistling is obnoxious behaviour. I know there's always someone over there saying, oh, you can't say what you want anymore in this country without being arrested. You can't do what you want, and you can't even, make racist chants at the football. Young men are being mad, but they're not. It's a lie. It's a lie from the people who lie about everything, who lie about immigration. They lie about modernity. They lie about judges. It's a lie. So I'm not interested in why lies work today. I know they work. God knows I know they work. We talk about Brexit every other day still. But I'm interested in what it's like to be on the receiving end of the misogyny that grows up in the wake of the lies that these people like Tate tell about women, about society, about equity. What is it like? And the reason I wanted to remind you of the medium that we're engaging in and remind you that I got no problem at all encouraging men to ring in to tell me what life is like for women in 2025, but that is part of the problem. I am, even if you've never rung me before and never thought you ever would, I am talking to and about you. I'm talking to the mums, to the wives, to the girlfriends, to the daughters, to the sisters of men who have done things that have made you wince. And you love them and you know them, and you don't believe this is them. It's not, we talked a little bit yesterday about the authentic self. This is not how they were. This is something that has been done to them. The influence of, and they're all good at it. Let's not pretend otherwise. You've got to have a form of diabolical genius. It's not just any old Billy Bunch of numbers with a bulldog avatar popping up on social media or standing on a street corner and shouting bilious hatred about women. They are insidious and intelligent, and they worm their way into the minds of previously pleasant young men. And they leave poison at every turn, poison that turns into hatred, and hatred of women. So what's it like to be a woman in a world where men who encourage hatred of you, sexual objectification of you, have enjoyed a period of enormous success? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. 16 minutes after 10 is the time. If you're wondering why, most newspapers united this morning in one element of the trial of the 26-year-old man found guilty of raping his ex-girlfriend before shooting her dead with a crossbow and then killing her sister and her mum after she ended an 18-month relationship. A court heard that he was fueled by misogyny. The same court heard that he had been watching tape after tape after tape, recording after recording after recording of Andrew Tate. So what's it like to live in a world where you have watched men you know change as a consequence of being exposed to the sort of misogyny that the court heard about in this case? Who are the men in your life that are, what behaviours, and they won't be as extreme as this, I hope, obviously, but what are the behaviours you've experienced or encountered that you think were fueled by misogyny, to use that phrase? And do give me a call on this. I'll be fine. You know, if you don't want to talk about it, I can happily fill the airwaves until 11, but I'll be a man talking about what women go through. So much of these conversations involve men talking about what women go through, or men pontificating on what women go through. So would you tell me what it is like to encounter a boy or a man in your actual life, not on the front page of your newspapers or in an online video, in your life, who is, in your view, quotes, fueled by misogyny, end quotes. And I guess specifically this very 21st century brand of misogyny from which Andrew Tate has reportedly made a fortune. He was until very recently under house arrest in Romania, but he was recently welcomed into the United States of Donald Trump's America. Make of that what you will. It's 10:18 after it was reported that Trump's government had put pressure on the Romanian authorities to give him his passport back. 0345 6060 973. Men can text me, and I am interested in your thoughts because I'm interested in everybody's thoughts. But the voices I want to hear are the voices of women who know what it's like to face someone fueled by misogyny. It's 10:18.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Minutes after 10. We're not talking about Trump today, really, although we are talking about misogyny and a man who has raped and murdered women as after prolonged exposure to misogynistic content, misogynistic ideology. So there are crossovers, but I've lost it. I can't keep up with what is happening and what is not, what is real and what is not real. I don't think anybody is making up stories about Donald Trump. I don't think anybody is saying, oh, yeah, apparently he's going to abolish the Department of Education. He said that yesterday. I had to check. I thought, no, that can't be right. He's what? So I've seen a story about them removing not just black people from history, but women as well, like removing photographs from archives of women who have been the first pilots or pioneers in any field. But I haven't actually done the digging yet to establish whether or not it's completely true. Why would anybody make that up? So far, every single thing I've checked has been true. So there is crossover here. But at the moment, the plan today is not to wade back into the geopolitical scenarios. It is 10:21 and Caitlin is in Cardiff. Caitlin, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Nice to speak to you.
Likewise.
I sort of feel quite passionate about this issue, so I did want to call in today. I think the way that, we see misogyny and especially over the internet in the last few years, I think it is becoming, quite a large issue. And I've read studies on how, misogynistic language in schools is increasing. And I mean, for myself, when I was in school, sort of 10 years ago, when I was a teenager,
yes,
I was very well aware at that point of misogyny and the way that, going on dates with boys and, the boys would be seen as, really well done and, tell their friends things and, especially on my peers, photos and messages being sent around and shared between boy groups and the way that was all viewed. And I can't imagine how much more awful it must be now, which, you'd obviously think it would be the other way around.
What about someone listening to this who doesn't know what the word means? What are we actually talking about? And I don't think, I was about to apologise for asking you a stupid question, but as I was framing it in my mind, I thought, I'm not sure it is that easy to answer, which means it's not actually a stupid question. I know what the dictionary says, but when you use that word, and you just used it 3 or 4 times, what have you got in your mind? What do you think?
I think it's the ideologies that are so sedimented into the minds of young people, and therefore, as they grow up, become sedimented into the minds of adults as well. And it's not something conscious. And I think in most cases, with most men that I encounter, they would never want to be consciously misogynist. They would never want to treat a woman differently or have a different idea of her. But I think all of this is so ingrained that it's happening on a almost subliminal level, where, like Nick's show earlier, obviously talking about male heroes and things like that for me, there are still many more male heroes that we see in society than we see sort of female heroes.
There's millions. So they're everywhere. I wasn't really listening. So what people were suggesting, that there's a shortage of male heroes or male role models.
Yeah. There's sort of a decline in that, and I think there's I've seen as well that if women speak up in a space sort of 50% of the time, the men in the room will perceive for women to have been speaking the majority of the time.
It happens on the show, actually. It happens on the show, and almost every day there's a preponderance of male callers. Obviously, by dint of it being my show, the male voice is going to be overrepresented, and I happen to represent more than the average male even. But even, I will occasionally get a message complaining about there being so many women on the programme when they haven't even been half. So I guess what we're going to struggle to pin down, or at least we are at the moment, is what's changed. Because a lot of people listening to this will be thinking, well, that's exactly what it was like when I was young. There's no real change there. The floor has never belonged to the woman. The floor has always been the man's. The patriarchy has always been in place. But there's something about Tate's influence that is both ancient and modern.
I think there's now pride in, those viewpoints. I think obviously misogyny has been around for a long time and sexism has been around for a long time. But I think, throughout, the majority of, especially, the latter half of the 1900s, from historical perspective, it was, seen as, I do think women should have more rights. I do think women should have more rights. And now it seems that that's flipped. And I think the danger that we experience with Andrew Tate is social media becomes an echo chamber for whatever content you sort of interact with.
Yes.
And I think there's therefore lots of young boys that have very impressionable minds that, are interacting with, some funny joke that Andrew Tate has said.
Yeah, and some aspirational content about getting fancy cars and being good at chess and all the other things there. But underpinning it all, a profound hatred and objectification of women.
Yeah, and I think, I don't think it starts like that for a lot of people on social media. As I said, you'll interact with one thing that's sort of a bit funny, and then, you see more and more content that, social media assumes you will like.
And the algorithm starts bombarding you in a way that I don't think you can understand unless you've actually been there. Caitlin, thank you. I'm cracking on only to get other voices on, not to start pontificating blokishly about this. Thank you. I steer things back towards what it's like to be on the receiving end, with a side order of how men fall down this trap. I said I wasn't going to name names, but it's nearly 10:30 now. So Jules and Raj, put the phones down, will you, pal? Seriously, this isn't your moment. Anne's in Lewisham. Anne, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise.
It's been a long time since I was a young woman, but I'm a woman. And I've got a 23-year-old daughter.
Okay.
And what really alarmed me is that quite a few of her friends who are in relationships, to me, it looks quite controlling, and it does to my daughter.
Okay.
I'll give you a first example. When my daughter goes out clubbing, she says, if a guy approaches you and you're not interested, they keep coming back. They don't take no for no, and then they get upset and they get angry, and there's a little bit of a verbal exchange.
Wow.
But she also said that what some guys do is, if you'd give them your number to kind of get them away, but you'd give a wrong digit at the end.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Do you ever doing that? Well, you probably don't, but anyway.
No one ever asked for my phone number. I'd have handed out flyers back in the day. Carry on.
Some of them do is they ring your number in front of you.
Wow.
So when you give them the number and you've done a wrong digit, they will ring it just to check you've given them the correct number. When she told me that, and this was quite a while ago she told me that, I was like, oh my God. I mean, I think that just shows the level of arrogance.
It does, doesn't it? It's more than arrogance. I don't know what it is, but you're right. Sometimes a story is so much more powerful than an actual explanation or a theory, isn't it? There's something there about denying that woman agency. You're not allowed to reject me.
Yeah. And then what they'll do is, she says, particular young men, is they will then say, well, I want your right number. And she says, and my daughter's a very strong character, very, very strong. She's not easily intimidated, etc. She'd be like, you're not getting it.
Yeah.
But she says that a lot of girls, because they get frightened, will then give them the right number and then later on block the number.
Oh.
So, the guys have called me in front of them, yes, it's my number. And then she said, and then they will block it because they're frightened to not give the right number after they've called them in front of them and it's clear it's not the right number.
And that speaks to something that's happened to those young men that is different from you mentioned your age. I don't think it was like that when you were her age. I think if you told a fella that you weren't interested, he would take the hint. No. Usually,
I'd say 99% of the time. But
well,
when I was her age many years ago, I did that once very politely. don't want to dance. And I always used to say, it's nothing personal, just don't want to dance.
Yeah.
And then he came back,
Yeah.
don't want to dance. And then he got very, like, you think you're something, you think you're better than me.
Yeah. But he stuck out. He sticks out in your memory, and he stuck out in that club. And he stuck.
I can remember that someone got quite aggressive about me saying no. But my daughter, it just seems to be every time they go out. She says, these guys approach you and you say no, and they come back.
Because they've been taught that, I mean, it began with negging. Do you remember negging, Anne? And they were they were pick-up artists, they were called, and they'd write books, and the way that you succeeded sexually was to wear women down and to insult them and make them feel bad about themselves, so that you became the one who could then temporarily restore their self-esteem by showing sexual interest in them. So I see that as part of the path you're describing, and then at the end of it, it's not even sophisticated, for want of a better word. These men have been taught that women do not have the right to reject them.
Yeah. And she's also got a few girlfriends who, I said about the control.
Yes.
There's one particular girlfriend, my daughter's girlfriend, she lives with her partner. And if they go out, he gives her a time to come home.
He gives her a time to come home?
Yes.
Yeah.
Usually midnight. And if she doesn't, because a few times she stayed at our house.
Yeah.
And if she isn't home by midnight, he bolts the door.
Wow.
And she is my daughter's age, and he is.
And that's coercive control, really.
And he can go out wherever he likes, as long as he likes, wherever he likes. And yet with her, he has real restrictions on what she does and where she goes and time she gets in. And she's James. This isn't just this one friend.
Go on.
She has a few friends where their boyfriends dictate and keep control over them.
I don't know how to phrase the next question because it is close to victim blaming, but you must have wondered why they put up with it.
Okay, in terms of my daughter, James,
Yeah.
she wouldn't let anybody tell her what to do.
Yeah.
So even if she initially liked this guy, actually it has happened, she likes this guy, they start to date, and if he's out of line or does something she doesn't like, or any inkling of control or real insecurity where they kind of all want an excuse to control you, she dumps them. And she has nothing more. Her friends that are, I feel, and she feels, have been quite controlled, they're very lack quite self-esteem.
Yeah, and they spot that. That's what groomers do, isn't it?
And I say they look for their victims, James. If they know that you lack self-esteem and confidence, and even if you're quite a gentle person.
Yes.
And I say it because my daughter will literally, she literally has got a tongue on her. But when she needs it, she needs it, she won't be like, pussyfooting around. She'll be like, do you know what? Go do one.
Yeah.
But
some people really don't like confrontation, do they?
Exactly. Her girlfriends that are, let's say, controlled, are don't want conflict, don't feel confident enough to stand up because they feel physically threatened. My daughter will actually, she literally...
Yeah, sure.
She's thinking about anything.
And that's what I love about you, and the way that you've just explained that, is that you are not casting, your daughter as being better than her friends, or you as having done something right, and therefore it doesn't happen to her. No. This is just, there will be a bit of nurture, a bit of influence going on here, but it's also serendipity and quite possibly nature,
But equally, James, some people can be in a situation where, it's at that time in their life, something's happened and they become we've all become vulnerable at some point in our life.
Absolutely right, and some people can smell it on us.
Exactly, and I actually think that's who they look for, is either someone who's in a very vulnerable state in their life or somebody who is quite, self-esteem generally or doesn't like conflict. They seek it out, James, because they know then actually I then can control her or whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
And it's really sad because I think there's nothing changed,
Well, I mean, in some ways, and this will be my final question because I'm incredibly late for the news and Keith is looking very agitated. It's not really about nothing having changed. I mean, the music is the same, but things are worse for your daughter than they were for you.
But I think that's the internet, James. I think it's what.
Well, of course, it's the internet because that's where this fella does his stuff, isn't it? It's a catch-all and an easy thing to say, but it doesn't mean it's not true. And of course, I would remind you, as Nick has done many times this morning, that we're dedicating most of our programming on Monday to online safety, and this story fits completely. And thank you. And that was so necessary and so important and so perfectly expressed. I really am grateful to you, because I need to hear from women about what this is like. It doesn't really matter what we think. 0345 6060973. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
38, and I didn't imagine it, and it is not fake news. There is a book by an author called Jason Stanley called Erasing History: How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. And something that the Associated Press has got hold of, documents that are in circulation in the United States, are absolutely incontrovertible evidence of the Donald Trump administration's determination to rewrite the past in order to control the future. They are in real time erasing history. I'll bring you more details on that before close of play today. But back to the misogyny question and the knowledge that, as I think Anne perfectly articulated, things are worse now than they were 20 or 30 years ago. I'm going to read one text, and I'm just going to remind everybody that if you don't want me to read your name out, try and put it at the top of the text, because sometimes I'll read half of it off air, decide to come back to it on air, read it all the way through having said your name, and then I'll get to the end and see that you've asked me not to name you. Happily, that's not going to happen here, but only because I managed to read it all the way to the end before we came back on air, because the subject matter is so sensitive. James, Andrew Tate is ruining men's lives. He is making money out of their misery. Men are also being told by him that seeking help for mental health is weak. Oh, gosh. Did you hear Stuart in Crawley yesterday talking about his trauma as a child? I'd love to see someone tell him he was being weak yesterday when he was so brave and so courageous on the programme. And then Aaron in Liverpool. It should not be happening. My ex-husband needs help, but he consumes this content and it is destroying him. Please don't say my name in the nick of time. And that's missing from my questions this morning. We did it first on vaccines. Like when someone you love goes down the rabbit hole. And we took calls, didn't we, from people who thought that this was going to actually end their whole relationship. All cults make you cut off contact with your previous connections, with your family, with your partner. All cults do that. But what's it like when your husband or your boyfriend, your long-term, what is it like when they change in front of your eyes, I imagine. They start believing this stuff. I wonder if you can tell me what that is like on 0345 6060973. Anna, from Anne to Anna, is in Newton Abbot. Anna, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
First-time caller, long-time listener.
Welcome.
Bit nervous.
Welcome. It's only me.
So I think there's sort of two sides to this. So the history of it and how we've got to where it's worse now, I think has come from this normalisation that we can discuss women's fundamental human rights.
Yes.
And that makes me really cross.
Yes.
Frankly.
Yes, well, you heard the Vice President of the United States of America telling lies about family planning clinics in this country while ignoring the threat posed to the West by Russia and China. So it's not confined to Andrew Tate and internet weirdos, is it?
Oh, no. I mean, and it's the Farages of this world, yet again, who come round to this whole idea that women are a set of people to be treated like children, to be controlled, to be, are we full humans or are we not? And because we've had that discussion, we've allowed and normalised that discussion for so long now, it's become true, that we are a subset of humanity.
And that younger men are more susceptible to believing that than older men, I suppose. And I mean...
It just is the only thing they hear.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. We never talk about whether or not men should have rights.
No, we don't. Well, I think these people do, probably. If you were to sit down and watch some Andrew Tate videos, you would be told that men don't have rights, that women have more rights. And apparently on Nick's show this morning, people were saying that men don't have heroes or role models anymore, which is Well, I mean, we can chuckle, and I think we probably have to. Hang on, just excuse me a minute. Scott, Ian, put the phones down, please. This isn't your show. Not today. You can come on in the next hour, but this is not about men, okay? Or rather, it's about men, but it's about what they do to women. It's not about you, lads, all right? Chill. And Farage has hooked up with a couple of US-based extreme anti-abortion groups, and we know that he has described himself as part of the similar phenomenon of Andrew Tate. But how does it land in your life? I presume you've got a daughter or something to make these comparisons.
I do. Yeah, and she'll be 16 next month.
Right.
And I think, although it is objectively worse than it was when I was that age, there is also a positive, I think, to this, in that because of the internet and because of social media and because of the ability to communicate, young girls are more aware of what's going on, and they don't feel isolated with it.
Okay.
So she and her quite large group of friends, who are girls and boys, are very aware of who what they refer to as the tater tots in their year are.
Oh, okay.
And they steer clear of them.
But that protects them, but it doesn't protect some of the girls that Anne was telling about, some of her daughter's friends.
Well, quite. But because of the ability to communicate on the internet, there is a chance you'll stumble across some of these young women.
Yeah. Okay.
And they will help, And yes, they're not as
where the
pervasive as the Andrew Tates of the world, but they are there.
I didn't know that. And that's where the pushback comes from. People essentially saying, you're better than this. You deserve more than this. You deserve a lot more than this. To women and to men, I mean, variations on the old instruction to give your head a wobble.
I'm not even sure it's telling women you deserve more than this. It's just saying, look at those boys over there. They're idiots because they believe this stuff.
Why do they believe it?
Well, because they've fallen down the Andrew Tate rabbit hole online.
They're being told, in a sense, what they want to hear. It's like all processes of grooming and cultish grooming, as they're being given you're the real victim here. And I think it is hard for young. I mean, I've got a 17-year-old son as well. Definitely, absolutely, definitely. It's a really tough time for every youngster. But again, I suppose divide and rule is what they're doing. They're saying, the girls have got it easy. You lads are the real victims here. Whereas, in fact, A, that's not true, and B, girls and boys have a really, really, really tough time of it at the minute for a whole heap of reasons.
Yep. And
Well, I mean, again, you and Anne have both avoided that potential pratfall of sounding as if you're claiming you have done something right and therefore this has not come into your life. And I wouldn't be too critical or judgmental of anyone who did that today because the territory is so fraught. But goodness me, the way in which this has happened is absolutely shocking. Absolutely shocking. And because of that fear of giving attention to people who are desperate for attention, I don't think there is an objective answer to that question, by the way. There's so many of them out there. So desperate for, please notice me, please notice me, please. Like, it's almost like a professional troll. Except there comes a point when society is being damaged so badly by their influence and their actions that to ignore them for fear of giving oxygen to the flames of their hatred and their bigotries is to actually help them. By ignoring them, you help them. What is it they say about things flourishing in the darkness? You have to shine the light. And thank goodness Sheila Fogarty has been shining the light on this issue for LBC listeners for the longest time. But I said before and I'll say again, we should have done so sooner and a lot more comprehensively. It's 10:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
There were so many parallels, aren't there, with so many of the other things that we talk about, but we will, moving forward, talk about this more. This Blue Sky message puts it well. Tate et al. Present themselves as coaches for people who are lonely and feel that they are failing. I would add failed to that analysis as well. Failing and or failed. They have been failed, let down, betrayed. They set up an online support group for directionless young men and then radicalise them towards gender-based violence. It's the exact same process that Islamic extremists use. And, of course, not just Islamist extremists. It's also the same playbook that we've seen in all other areas of bigotry, isn't it? You take someone who has things to be unhappy about, not all of them. Some of them just lap it up, but usually people are maybe lonely, maybe angry about the set of cards they've been dealt. And what these people do is they move in and say, it's a bit like that old cartoon, isn't it, of Rupert Murdoch sitting at the table with with an ordinary worker and an immigrant with 10 biscuits in the middle of the table, and Rupert puts 9 of them in his pocket, gives the other biscuit to the ordinary worker, and then says that that immigrant's taken all your other biscuits. That's what you do. I always get that cartoon wrong, but it's a variation on that theme. You know, you've seen it everywhere. I tell you why you haven't got as much money as you think you should have. Nothing to do with the people who just keep getting richer. The people who are richer than Croesus, absolutely all over Trump's administration. The richest men in the world, literally in the middle of the White House, on the Air Force One getting free ride. Literally, the richer men who are richer than any man in history has ever any need to be. Dedicated to getting richer. And how the hell are they going to do that if they don't persuade you that the reason why you're not as well off as you should be, or why you're struggling with the cost of living is because of them? Of course not. It's because of him over there, or it's because of women. It's because of women. So it's ancient. These isms are ancient, and that's why it is true. Women are on the list. So you've heard Donald Trump use the phrase DEI. You've heard his cheerleaders talk about diversity, equity and inclusion as something that must be fought against. Well, were you expecting references to a World War II Medal of Honor recipient? Were you expecting references to the Enola Gay aircraft that dropped an atomic bomb on Japan, or the first women to pass Marine infantry training to be effectively erased from history? They have been, all of those things have been marked for deletion as the Defense Department works to purge diversity, equity and inclusion content. More than 26,000 images flagged for removal across every military branch, and the final total could be much higher, because they do not want to advertise the fact that women can be brilliant Marines. I presume the Enola Gay one is because the word "gay" is in the name of the aircraft, and the algorithm they're using to purge all the DEI content isn't sophisticated enough to recognise how stupid that is. But who knows? But that's what it is. You know, show me one ism, I'll show you all the others. Always in the same space. 10:53 is the time. Debbie is in Bexley. Debbie, what would you like to say?
Hi,
Hello,
morning.
Debbie. Hello.
I'm calling in, I think, because this is something that I feel quite strongly about.
Yes.
I'm a mum of 2 young kids, 2 young girls. I've had family and friends murdered, women murdered by men in their lives. Okay. I've myself been, sexually assaulted in public. So coming up, I think, as a woman, younger and now older, I've had a gamut of experience to have the negativity and the toxicity that can occur. But I think it's never, in some respects, been as bad as it is now, in part because of social media.
Sure. And
part of what I'd rung in to talk about, I suppose, was also the impact that it's had in part on my husband, who is an older gentleman. He's not a young guy.
Okay.
I would say for the most part, otherwise he's pretty sensible.
Yeah.
He is not otherwise necessarily inclined to read into things, but
Sure.
I think the algorithms have brought up a certain set of content online. He ended up following somebody online that I didn't particularly like him following, but,
Okay.
I'm never going to tell him what he can and can't do.
Sure.
There was occasionally comments that he started to come out with that I just felt really uncomfortable with. And I just thought, how is it that you, somebody that I know otherwise is really respectful, otherwise really caring of all the women in your life, even you, it seems to have really seeped in to your consciousness.
Can I ask what sort of comment? You don't have to tell me. I know this won't be incredibly easy for you, this conversation, but what kind of things set your alarm bell ringing?
So without naming the particular content creator...
You can if you want.
It was a gentleman, I think, called Kevin Samuels in America, and he used to effectively have quite a lot of women on, and almost sort of, rate them, effectively berate them, for the most part, end up berating them and telling them how rubbish they are, and why they're a 4 out of 10 and why most men won't want them.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
And there was almost a sort of humorous side to it. So they bring on people that perhaps didn't have the most insights, but then almost use it as a lever to sort of bash women generally.
Okay.
And there would be comments, I think, from my partner where I just sort of think, you're reading into this, you're buying into that, women as a whole are all like some of these women, or women that, might not be as desirable, whatever it might be, to certain people.
Yes.
And then that attributes, and I just think if that can reach him...
I'm reading about him now. He sneered at modern women who flaunted their multiple college degrees and boasted of their independence. He criticised black women for being old and out of shape and for having children out of wedlock, but he did it, one journalist writes, in a tailored suit and bathed in mood lighting with a funky kinetic energy sculpture on his desk. And then you're right, women queued up to zoom into his show and got critiqued by him.
Yeah. So it was always a really uncomfortable watch, generally.
For you.
Yeah. If you were to ask me, do you think it stopped, or why has it stopped? In part, with no disrespect to him, it's in part because Kevin Samuels passed away. So your husband hasn't found another fix, as it were? No, I think that there's definitely been imitators that have sought to take his place, and you can pretty quickly see through them. There was a charisma. I will give him that. There was a charisma that he had that I think a lot of other people don't have, and I think that's what people like Tate and what people, to an extent, like Trump, will have, and it draws you in. And so the little bit of truth that they give you, you're prepared to take that and ignore the rest of what they're saying in order to make yourself potentially feel better about where in your life you feel that women have done you wrong, or where you've fallen short, and so it can't be you, it's got to be them. Brilliantly put, Debbie, thank you. Are you all right? Yeah. Good. Yeah, I think. Good. No, you did. That was really helpful. It was. You really are, and it really helped me to come to a better understanding of how bad these things can happen to previously decent and still decent people, but harbouring indecent ideas, indecent thoughts that have been put there. And that's the point, really, isn't it? A quick text, no names. I'm a mother to a 21-year-old son who I love dearly, but his life has gone off track, particularly his mindset towards women. I blame social media, a diet of Andrew Tate and others. I'll never stop feeling culpable for letting this happen under my nose. He's always been told how much he is loved. He's been very well educated. He has role models. His father and other members of the family are true gentlemen in every sense, and yet my son is a woman-hating person who I increasingly can't stomach to be around. The way he talks and thinks is appalling and hurtful. Thank you for examining this. Well, I couldn't examine any of it without the callers that I've had, and it is a subject to which we will return, possibly in part on Monday, when we're dedicating much of our programming to online safety, and that does seem to be a very big part of this problem, doesn't it?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 11, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean, you could be forgiven for wondering why we haven't waded back into matters international or indeed matters Trumpish, but I think we've covered it mostly this week. We certainly went ahead of the pack yesterday on talking about that EU Leaders Summit and the significance of us no longer being in the room where it happens. £800 billion is the figure that they have loosely settled upon as the financing of the Rearm Europe plan. I said it before and I'll say it again. Well, Emmanuel Macron has said it as well. This is huge. This is an absolute recalibration of the world order, the international order, the post-war settlement, the Pax Americana, whatever you want to call it. But I don't think much has moved since yesterday. So that is why at the moment I'm not necessarily minded to talk about that. And I wasn't minded to talk about this either, because it lends itself so obviously to a lazy tabloid treatment. You know, here are some children that need help. They are getting the help. Oh, I'm so cross about that. Why aren't they getting the help from somewhere else? Why aren't their parents doing it? Why isn't Father Christmas providing the help that they need? Because the people who are actually dealing with these children every day have said that they are not getting the help that they need from the places that your children got help from, i.e. you. So when I read schools' anger over plans for lessons in how to brush teeth, I think two things. I think it's almost certainly a little bit more nuanced than that. And I also think, oh, here we go. Open up the furnace and start shoveling in the righteous fury about a broad misrepresentation of what is actually going on. 49,000 patients under 19 had a tooth extracted last year. I read somewhere about the percentage of hospital admissions that actually involve dental problems, particularly for young people. And of course, if you're a teacher and you're already buckling under the stress of your workload and you get a memo saying, oh, by the way, you're going to have to teach kids how to brush their teeth tomorrow, you're not going to be over the moon about it. But it is almost certainly a more nuanced and a more interesting story than some, I stress, of the coverage allows. You won't need it every day either, will you? It'll be 6 to 7 minutes with school staff supervising children who don't really know what brushing their teeth is all about. And that seems to me to be the point. Is if I put you in front of a class of 30 or 40 children and you ask, or maybe you'd have to do it individually, and you ask the ones who don't know how to brush, did you brush your teeth today? I mean, not to be unkind about it, but you've probably got a fair idea which kids have never brushed their teeth in their lives, haven't you? Just as you do with adults. But you say, who hasn't brushed their teeth today? And you realise they're not getting the guidance at home. And I don't want to make excuses for these parents, but they are unlikely to be waking up every morning intending to neglect and diminish their child's experience. Some of them will know no better. Some of them probably don't brush their own teeth. So if, for example, you need help understanding why this is probably a bit more nuanced than most tabloid treatments would allow, if you have got an adult at home who doesn't brush their own teeth, how can you say that they should be responsible for teaching their child to brush their teeth? It is never going to happen. If they announced a scheme to encourage adults to brush their own teeth and teach their children how to brush their teeth, the same people would have a problem for a slightly different reason. It's just this weird smugness that sets in when you're one of life's lucky people, that everybody else who needs help achieving some of the things that were achieved for you without any effort or notice whatsoever must somehow be wrong-uns, delinquent. There'll be some awful parents out there. So it's not about teeth brushing, this story. Or rather, the conversation we're about to have is not about brushing your teeth. It's about... I don't think I've ever asked you this before. Ben points out, it's education, for goodness sake. Of course it is. He tells me I had lessons on how to brush my teeth in primary school. They'd bring in a giant set of teeth and a giant brush. Surely this happened to loads of young people. It did, mate, but it's not going to make a column in the Daily Telegraph, is it? If they announce that they're going to be doing more of it. I've never asked you this question before, and I need to get it absolutely right. What's it like to have rubbish parents? And I don't mean cruel. We talked yesterday, we veered in. I didn't want to necessarily. I think in retrospect that was a mistake. I didn't want to veer into cruelty yesterday when we were talking about smacking. I thought it would be better to focus the conversation on people who had been smacked like I was smacked by absolutely loving, brilliant parents who were just simply reflecting the absolute normality of smacking children in a context of family for discipline. Rarely, but genuinely, okay? And of course that was a mistake, because a couple of the best calls that we took yesterday came from people whose fathers had crossed the line from normal into abnormal and unfair. So I know something else I got wrong. I'll get something right. What time is it? 8 minutes after 11. I'll get something right before the end of the week. We've been pretty good on Trump, haven't we? But just parents who are just not up to the job. And of course you don't realise it at the time. But they just weren't equipped to do it. I mean, because I'm thinking of a child who has never been shown how to brush their teeth. Do you know, I'm now being bombarded with messages from people who were taught how to brush their teeth in primary school. Josh says, I still remember the brush they brought in. It was enormous. So it's been going on forever, apparently. But Daily Telegraph up in arms about it today. I've got in my mind the parent who's just... I don't know quite what the word is, really. I don't want to malign them necessarily. It may be that by 12 o'clock today I realise that I'm a snowflake and that we should have been attacking these parents from the start. But you know that your mum loved you, right? You know that your mum loved you. But you also know now, and you look back, that she was a bit rubbish. And it may have been because of poverty. It may have been because of addictions. It may have been alcohol. It may have been drugs. You know, this is the point I want to stress. You know that she loved you, loves you still. But when you were little, you had to assume the role of the adult. So this has got nothing to do with brushing your teeth, this question, all right? This has got absolutely nothing to do, although I think I've got a dentist on the line who wants to explain why this is a good idea. So we'll make room for that kind of comment, but that is going to be a side order, for want of a better word, better phrase. This is about the knowledge that your mum loves you, but the knowledge now that you're an adult, that they were not what they should have been. And teeth brushing would be a really good example. Or you know that she loved you, but there was no food in the car, or you had to look after your kid. I just want to know how you do that. I want to know what that's like, in the sense of that love being real. That's so often missing from these conversations. Whenever we talk about these kind of issues, the temptation to think that the parents are utterly delinquent, that the parents are utterly awful, utterly absent, either physically or emotionally. And of course, if drugs and alcohol are involved, then there will be times when they are physically and emotionally absent, certainly emotionally. But rather than trying to attack people, trying to make lives better for children, let's talk about the children, what you grow up to be. The knowledge. When do you realise? How old are you when you realise? One of the things that pops up most often in Full Disclosure, my interview series, is that you only until a certain age, and we've never identified exactly what age it is, and it will be a different age for different people, won't it? But we only ever know the childhood that we're having. We never really know that our childhood is normal or abnormal until we get a little bit older, certainly until we're well into primary school and we start visiting other houses and we can start making comparisons with other people. My guest this week is last week's guest was Matt Ford, who grew up with a single mum in Nottingham who used to be a nun. But he doesn't realise that there's anything notable or different about that until he starts comparing himself with other kids when he gets a little bit older. It's a brilliant episode, by the way, and it's Katie Tunstall today. Another absolute scorcher, which I'll play you a little clip from later. But you don't know that your childhood is different from other people's until you're quite far into your childhood. And then you can look back when you're an adult and think, gosh, that wasn't fair, or that wasn't, I mean, so what would it be apart from toothbrushing? I mean, they're just these simple, basic things that everybody else took for granted. Your mum or your dad, or your mum and your dad didn't do it. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. What was it like when you were little to know that your parents loved you, but to know simultaneously, or to realise a little bit later, that they were really not up to the job? And what did you have to do to accommodate that? What did you have to do to make up for that? It's a tough one. As with the last hour, I really need to remind you that the phones don't ring themselves, and there won't be that many people listening to this in that category, and there'll be still fewer listening to this minded to ring in and tell the rest of us what it's actually like. But if we don't have conversations like this, then the little versions of you that are still out there today are not going to get help brushing their teeth, because everybody else is going to say, well, if it's not happening at home, then Sodom. But of course, that's not the right way to approach an issue like this. The right way to approach an issue like this is to say, what's the problem? Can we solve it? And then we all make like Bob the Builder and shout at the top of our voices, yes, we can. I think it is anyway. I mean, we may have a conversation about why I've got that wrong. But I think the best way to highlight why some young children will need help learning how to brush their teeth is to speak to some adults who used to be those children. And that might be you. And if it is, give me a ring, 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. It's just coming up to 11:15. Once again, I am being bombarded by people who are reminding me about being taught to brush their teeth. I think I'll go to Tim, who's in Kidderminster, because he was at a school which was incredibly close to one of my early homes in Kidderminster, and he says we were taught, this is French middle school for those who are up to date on matters Kidderminster. He says we were taught how to brush our teeth, we were taught how to look after them, and we even did that red tablet test where you could see the plaque on your teeth so you could then brush it off. This scheme is nothing new. I guess it just speaks to poverty porn, doesn't it? It just gives an opportunity to people who like to put the boot into poor people to somehow attack them for the fact that their children are receiving the sort of instruction and the sort of training that everybody seems to have received back in the day. It's 11:15. What was it like to be that child? The child who would have needed the kind of help that other people think you should have been getting at home, and they've never got an answer to the question, well, they're not getting it at home, so what should society do? It's 11:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:17. There is actually quite a lot to get through today. I wanted to do some updates on Ukraine for slightly obvious reasons. I've also signed up, as I suggested we would, one of the excellent people at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, to answer a couple of the questions that came in on yesterday's programme with regards to, for example, whether or not we can, Europe can take on Russia without the US, and then a couple of other questions that you sent in. I shall put to Matthew Savill in about 15 minutes' time. An extraordinary story, which, again, rather flies in the face of almost all the media coverage that I can remember, involving the figures are in for the impacts that the ULEZ expansion has had on communities in and around the capital. ULEZ, you'll remember, introduced by Boris Johnson and then expanded by Sadiq Khan. We're hoping to be joined by the Mayor of London from a primary school in North London to tell us the detail of those results, those findings. And Oz Katerji, who's helped us out many times with regard to issues in Kyiv, is going to fill us in on just how Ukraine is reacting to this redrawing of the post-war settlement that Donald Trump has undertaken at breakneck speed. But for now, we're just looking at that question of the children who need teachers to tell them how to brush their teeth because it hasn't happened at home. And that's just one example of what might be happening at home. And you know that your parents loved you, but looking back now, you also know they just weren't up to it. I hadn't even mentioned mental health, which may be part of the process. And we're coming at this story from a position of love, compassion, sympathy, and an attempt to understand, which is desperately unfashionable, because what we should be doing is punching our desk and shouting about how the parents should be teaching this and why the hell should the teachers, which between you and me is a hell of a lot easier. It's 11:19. Paul's in Selby. Paul, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How are you doing?
Can't complain.
I'm very nervous.
Hey, it's only me.
I know it's only you. Yeah, I mean, the whole brushing your teeth thing really sort of resonated with my upbringing.
Did it?
To be honest with you. Yeah, I mean, it was something that we were never made to do. And then I got to a certain age at school and I fancied this girl called Joanne Braggington, who said she wouldn't go out with me unless I brushed my teeth.
You got your mojo back fairly quickly there, didn't you?
So I started brushing my teeth. But the thing is that then my family then started taking the mickey out of me for being sort of a little bit anal retentive because I brushed my teeth twice a day.
Are you joking?
No.
Oh,
no,
my
not at
Lord.
all.
So, Keith said something about the toothpaste adverts in the early days addressing really quite surprised. I haven't found the stats yet. I don't know if he's dug them out. He's still looking, apparently. About the being quite low take-up. The idea of brushing your teeth twice a day was not normal until relatively recently. So your family wouldn't have been out of the ordinary. But similar attitude. It's a Yorkshire thing as well. They had a similar attitude towards deodorant, if I remember correctly, at one point.
Well, also getting bathed. We only got bathed on Sunday.
So this isn't necessarily. Well, I don't know if it is or not. So you didn't stand out now if you were going to school without having been taught how to brush your teeth or without having it stressed to you how important it was. You would really stand out. Back then, what was her name again?
Joanne Braggington.
Joanne Braggington notwithstanding, then you wouldn't necessarily have stood out
I think we did.
Right.
I came from, fortunately, my mum and dad got married at 16 years old. They were really young.
Yeah.
They met at 15, married at 16.
Wow.
My mum, bless her, is suffering from Alzheimer's at the moment. She's in a home.
Yeah.
No, it is what it is. But it was a case of she was very, very young. They were both very young. My dad worked away from home.
Yeah.
My mum worked full time in a sewing place, and we're pretty much left to our own devices, other than my Auntie Linda looking after us.
One of my favourite people in Yorkshire is called Linda. It's a lovely name. It really is.
Oh, thank you. But it was a case of not knowing how to brush our teeth. It was a case of being made to brush our teeth.
Okay.
And I think that's where half the problem comes from. I think kids do. I think if schools took it upon themselves to have a teeth brushing time for their class, first thing when they came in, that'd solve a lot of the problems, as opposed to teaching them how to brush teeth.
Yeah, so you knew what to do, you just weren't being compelled to do it.
Yeah.
Because I remember.
I've always made my kids brush their teeth, but they've never wanted to. It's always been get upstairs and brush them properly.
Do you know what? You're right, actually, aren't you? I'd forgotten about that element of it. I remember munching a bit of toothpaste so that when Mum smelt my breath, it would smell like I brushed my teeth, but I hadn't actually been bothered to do so.
Yeah.
Because it felt like another chore, didn't it? It felt like another chore to do or another thing. So, crikey. So you've got enormous love and sympathy for your parents, but you're just thinking they were 16 when they started on this path.
They were 16. It was silly things like, sometimes there weren't food in, or I had to look after my sister, do you know what I mean? And it was a case of there's some beans in the cupboard. It was always beans.
Yeah.
It was, but my dad worked away. My dad worked away for 3 weeks at a time.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So we weren't short of money. It wasn't a money thing. It wasn't
It was time and attention, in a way. And time and attention and knowledge, not having the knowledge. And if they haven't got the knowledge, or they haven't got the inclination to impose or insist is a better word, then you can't blame the child for it. And you turn up at school. I've forgotten her first name. Braggington. Nicola, was it? No, Joanne Braggington. There we go. If it wasn't for Joanne Braggington, you wouldn't have realised yourself. How long did you go out with her for, Paul?
Only a few weeks.
Those were the days, eh? 23. Where is she now? 23 minutes after 11. I'll tell you what, if Joanne Braggington wins in, you can both have a Mystery Hour board game. It's 24 minutes after 11. Andrew's in Derby. Andrew, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. First time caller. So, again, a little bit nervous.
It's only me. Again, it's only me. Go on.
It's only you. So my story is, I suppose, starts a little bit similar to the previous caller, where my mum became a parent to my older brother at around 18, and she didn't work. She had no money. My dad worked away on shifts and things, and he didn't make a lot of money either. And I just don't think that they were equipped. They just didn't know how to parent. Everything was very transactional. It was do this and I'll do this to you, and or do this and I'll give you this, as opposed to there being a kind of a why or a coaching or a teaching us how to grow up and how to live. So it was all very. If I did something wrong, I'd get a smack and to try and prevent me from doing it again. But I think they likely loved us, but I just don't think they knew how to show it.
Yeah, and you have sympathy for that now. Did you always?
I have sympathy for it now. Did I to be honest, I look back at it and I think I'm not sure I ever even sought it at the time. It never occurred to me until I was an adult and I realised that I never had it. Yeah. It's only now that I'm a dad that and I can compare my life now to how it was, and it feels like I'm looking back on a completely different story, as if it wasn't actually me. Sure. As if I'm if it's completely separate to me.
And what I'm hearing is that it's almost what has come naturally to you just did not come naturally to them.
Yeah, exactly that, and I'm able now. Maybe it was through education. I'm not sure. My parents weren't very educated, but maybe it's through that, and maybe it's through life lessons. I joined the Air Force quite young, and then I got a lot of routine, routine. Yeah, absolutely, interaction with a lot more people, a lot more cultures, and then I don't think my mum ever sort of left a 1 mile radius from our house for 15 years. So I think I was exposed to more.
And that's education. I mean, not just, it's the word you used. It doesn't just mean it happened in a classroom, although, of course, in the context of how you help children in that situation who aren't getting the help that we would expect perhaps them to get at home, where else but a classroom? They can't all join they can't join the Air Force when they're 8, can they? Or when they're 6. Was there any specific thing you remember that I mean, I don't want to revisit childhood shame, but the something where you really wished, you really thought that your fellow classmates would be looking at you differently because of something that had happened or something that you didn't have? Or
I suppose the teeth brushing is the most visible, example of this. But having all the hand-me-down clothes, which I think I've kind of I now embraced anyway. But the no food in the cupboard. But even the more like parental things, like there was never once like a bedtime story, or a mum never told us that she loved us or anything like that. There was none of that. There were no holidays and things.
No, the bedtime story is really interesting, actually, because I don't know, because there's another story around we may do in the next hour about the heartbreaking number of people who haven't read a book in the last year, and I don't know how easy it would be to start trying to blame that on the parents as well, as some people seem determined to do in any kind of context. You sound like and did you stay close to them? I mean, did you did you have a good relationship with them as you got older? My if you don't mind me asking, morphed, I think no, it's okay. Yeah. My relationship with them morphed. I think because my mum had anorexia as well while I was growing up, and so it grew to a point where I sort of felt sorry for them more than anything, and I wanted to look after them, and I wanted to make sure that they were okay as I grew up, and I started making more money than they had ever made and things. All relative, like and I haven't made a lot of money, but I've made more money than I ever thought I would when I was a kid. And the balance shifts. The pendulum always shifts at some point in these relations, and I guess for some of the children that we're talking about today, it shifted very, very early, if not to the point where you felt that you had to look after them, the child had to look after the adults, then a realisation that the child had to look after the child, and in some cases the sibling. Andrew, thank you. All the calls, this really putting it across perfectly what we're trying to convey, and why. I don't know why it's a mission of mine. I think it's because my late father was the kind of journalist who would have been repulsed by what has happened to his profession and the way almost everything is turned into a lazy opportunity to attack vulnerable and undeserving people. Today, parents, for a scheme that has, as my inbox attests, existed in various ways, shapes and forms for almost as long as the education system has. But of course, it won't just be teeth brushing. And here's the statistic I was looking for. The minister responsible, Stephen Kinnock, has explained that the biggest cause of 5 to 9-year-olds being admitted to hospital is to have their decaying teeth removed. Now, come on. Oh, let's not try and help. Let's not try and fix this. The biggest cause of... Show me a 5 to 9-year-old who has been admitted to hospital, and the chances are that it's because they're having a tooth removed under general anaesthetic, which is, a big deal. A big deal. But no, let's not try and do anything about this because, I don't know, woke. 11:30 is the time. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11, something quite remarkable has happened. I said something on the show yesterday with a little aside about that's something we should do, isn't it, in the future? And it's actually now happening. We're in the future. If you're listening... Well, no, that doesn't work, does it? If you're listening to yesterday's show on Catch Up, you've got no idea what I'm saying at the moment. But we are now in the future from where we were yesterday when I said we must do that in the future. Normally I forget. Normally we drop the ball. Normally we move on. We get distracted. We're too busy. We don't. The producer decides that it wasn't important enough to return to. But here we are. It was important to return to. And Matthew Savill is here, the Director of Military Sciences at the Royal United Services Institute. And we're here, Matthew, essentially to address the question of what Europe can do in a fight with Russia if the United States is not there. But I've got some specific questions as well from my listeners. Some of them have already picked up on the fact that you're on Blue Sky and that you're poised to come on the programme. So we'll get to those as well. But I wonder if we begin with the bigger picture about just how shocked you are and how serious it is to see this, I mean, I suppose the twin policy decisions are the withdrawal of aid, the suspension of aid, and the suspension of military intelligence being shared with Ukraine. I don't know if anybody saw this coming, did they?
Good morning. Well, I think to a certain degree, what we are looking at is the logical continuation of what the Trump administration and was talking about last year. So the trend towards skepticism towards Ukraine and criticism of European defence spending, particularly on the latter, which you can understand, and it's been a theme of the US defence debate over the past 15 years or so. That is not necessarily surprising. And when I was asked about what did I think their approach would be in the autumn after the election, my view was it would be a reduction in US support, and the Ukrainians would need to try and prove that they were, essentially worth investing in, right, if you think Trump is transactional. However, I think the tone and, if you like, frankly, the brutality with which the US has operated has been a bit surprising. Hopefully that doesn't sound naive. And the extent to which they have positioned themselves as, if you like, neutral in this discussion. All of the leverage that we can see, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, is being applied coercively against the Ukrainians. And that is, I think, the bit that is surprising. Not that Trump is being transactional, that fundamentally all of the pressure is being applied to the Ukrainian side to the extent that their current efforts to fight the war are actively being undermined.
And a point made further by the Kremlin, I beg your pardon, by a presenter on Russian state TV, that there don't seem to be any demands or constraints on Putin at the moment. All of in the event of any peace treaty, all of the pledges and promises, requirements and compromises would have to be made by Zelensky's side.
Yes, and we don't know exactly what's happening as part of the US-Russia discussions, and Trump and others have sort of hinted that we shouldn't take everything that's happening at face value. But I think the political impact of how they have operated, particularly in the past week, will have consequences. And I think it will do significant damage to trust between Ukraine and the US. It will have an impact to morale on the front line. And I think Europe should be looking at this and thinking seriously about how it insulates itself from similar kind of blowback and activity in the future. It cannot eliminate it. The Western, NATO militaries are so closely intertwined that you can't just simply disentangle it, and it would not be desirable to do so. But they've got to seriously be looking at how this administration is operating and think, what is it that we bring that we can use as credit in future discussions with the US?
I think you're highlighting the fact that there will be two answers to my next question, one looking at the short term and one looking at the long term. But can Europe, and that would include us, even though, of course, Keir Starmer wasn't at that big meeting in Brussels yesterday, which put in some of the potential groundwork for what you described with this rearmament program. Can Europe fight Russia? Can Ukraine continue a fight with Russia with exclusively European support? I mean, is it feasible?
It is feasible. I think we have to reflect on the fact that Russian advances have been tremendously slow at incredible cost. And they have a whole series of crunch points coming up towards the end of this year in terms of their personnel losses, their artillery, barrel and ammunition production, the strain on their economy. They are not invincible. They are not wildly competent in terms of, infantry assaults. But they are suffering at a rate that they regard as bearable.
Right.
And what the withdrawal of US support does is shorten the time frame within which Ukraine can continue to suffer and outmatch and outlast the Russians. And Europe can do something about that, but it means that 2025 is going to be very painful for Ukraine.
And what should we be looking to Europe to do? I mean, is it as simple as turning plowshares into swords?
It's not. The first thing is that the industrial base in Europe, which has been increasing over time, has been doing so quite slowly. And so in the short term, Europe probably can't compensate for everything that the US brings, and particularly in some cases, some of the most sophisticated weaponry. So it can step up and do more, but not enough to effectively eliminate the problems that will be caused by the loss of US support. And that's why some of the recent announcements are important, because Europe really needs to get on with this. The other thing is that we can come back to the idea of a reassurance force, but a major training and support effort is required, come what may, to help the Ukrainians rebuild and regenerate their forces, and Europe could play a role there if it coordinated, and that might end up being in country after a ceasefire. It might be elsewhere, but this isn't just a question of more bullets and artillery shells and drone components.
Okay, how significant, and again I'd use that word, plausible or feasible, is Emmanuel Macron's proposal to offer France's nuclear deterrent to Ukraine?
Well, so far what he's talked about, this is, I mean, there's a classic of nuclear deterrence involves a degree of ambiguity. There has long been a debate about how France uses its nuclear deterrent. It is not part of the NATO planning group that coordinates alliance nuclear activity. So there's a lot of speculation over what he's really talking about here. Right. And mostly what he's done is restate the previous ambiguous position, which is there could be a European dimension to the French deterrent.
Okay.
So I think he's sort of hinting that maybe there are certain circumstances under which we would provide nuclear protection to countries in Europe. But in truth, that feels like, you know, a reminder of the previous ambiguous position.
A couple of specifics from my listeners, both today and yesterday. Quite a few people speaking to the same question from slightly different angles, but Matt probably puts it simplest. Could Trump, if the whim took him, could he turn off Trident? Could he sort of spike our Trident capabilities?
No. But there are long-term issues if we are trying to operate and maintain a deterrent without the US. So the operation, the use of a Vanguard class submarine at sea with Trident missiles, that is all a entirely UK sovereign endeavour, and we run that whole operation. We say we offer the deterrent up to NATO in terms of protecting our allies, but the use of nuclear weapons is fundamentally a UK decision. And that can carry on without interference from anyone else. The bit that matters over the medium to longer term is that we make the warheads, the bit on the top that detonates, the missiles, the Trident missile main body. We benefit by essentially having those as part of a larger stockpile that the US maintains in the US.
Okay.
And we draw from that stockpile. And it means that all of the maintenance facility is in the US, although we make the warheads here and we can store them here. So the issue would be is they cut off access to that stockpile. We would have a certain period of time, and nobody really knows how long this is, where in essence we have a load of missiles and we could pull our missiles out of that system, but we would have to store them. We can do that for a while in the UK, but also maintain them. How do we guarantee that they still work? Rockets, etc., have a lifespan. And so we would over several years have to work out, okay, do we now build up the infrastructure to properly store and maintain the missile component? Would we do that with somebody else? Could we afford it on our own? That's the bit that matters.
So, and also the difference between short term and long term. So short term, long term possible, short term not really. It's
well, I mean, as in, yes, there's no impact. The other thing in the long term is we have also gone into the replacement of both the boats and the upgrade of the missiles and the warheads in a joint projects with the US.
Yeah.
So there is a common missile compartment, the bit in the submarine where the missiles are stored and from which they are launched, which we are designing and building with the US. So if they pulled out completely and blocked access to the compartments, we'd have to come back to the UK, manufacture them here, incur all of the costs there. And we are redesigning and upgrading the warheads in a joint project with the US, and we would have to do the same. And we've got experience in warhead design, but essentially it would be, again, enormous cost added to those programs.
Is there, forgive my ignorance, Matthew, is that the thing that we went into with the United States and Australia? Is that linked to AUKUS, what you're describing?
No. So
right.
AUKUS is a project on conventional submarines, which are nuclear powered.
Nuclear powered, but not nuclear capable.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Okay, I understand the difference. And on that nuclear capable option, could we have gone with other partners if the British domestic politics had been different? Could we have got into bed with European partners rather than American?
Well, the reason why we were in bed with the Americans, partly because of the very long-term nuclear cooperation agreement,
right,
is that because we're using the same missile, an upgraded Trident, the missile compartment therefore is can work with those missiles. So the French are the only other people in Europe who maintain a submarine-based nuclear deterrent. It's a different missile in a different compartment in a different submarine.
Okay. This is fantastically helpful. Thank you so much. I'm going to own up in advance that I'm moving completely off the reservation with this question. I'm reading it out verbatim from one of my listeners who is already familiar with you because they include your Blue Sky handle in the question. Could the UK now join the European MUSIS satellite observation system?
So the honest answer is I have absolutely no idea. However, the principle behind the question is a valid one, which is that one of the other areas in which the UK has had enormous benefit over the years is our collaboration on imagery intelligence. So again, this is a Five Eyes benefit. The UK, the US, Australia, New Zealand and Canada. The UK, for basically most of the recent past, has not had its own imagery satellites. The US operates an extensive and sophisticated constellation. We do imagery analysis, and because we share other intelligence, we get access to most of the imagery from those satellites. It's an enormous benefit because launching satellites is expensive. And we process images on the ground, and then we get all of this great stuff that would cost us billions if we had to build it ourselves. Europe has slowly been building up its satellite intelligence and surveillance satellite capability. And the UK has just recently started launching trial and experimental satellites as part of now building up our own surveillance network, the Astari network, as it is called. And that is really important because what we're now recognizing is if you don't have access to the US constellation, where do you get your highly sophisticated imagery from? Commercial imagery, by the way, has come on leaps and bounds in recent years, but there are still advantages to having your own taskable military intelligence network. And so the question, should Europe be building up its space-based surveillance? Yes. Could the UK do more with the Europeans? Potentially. We have started building up our own capabilities in this area.
A final question. In all the years you've been doing this, your field of expertise, I know you were in the civil service before you joined RUSI. Have things ever felt quite so perilous?
There's a danger that you sort of get anchored by your own experience. I would say no. And I would compare this to the early 2000s and the ruptures that were caused over Iraq. And everyone remembers that, of course, the UK didn't get caught in the middle. We fundamentally went in with the US. Yeah. And everyone remembers freedom fries and all of the criticism of old Europe, et cetera, et cetera. In truth, that was patched up pretty quickly. France and the US and other European countries were talking to and working with the US pretty normally in a relatively short period of time, because essentially that was a policy disagreement that exacerbated some cultural disagreements. The way that this US administration is talking, it is actively antagonistic towards Europe as a whole, towards the EU, and it is skeptical of the institutions into which we have invested, such as NATO. So American criticism of European defense spending is not new, and Democrat and Republican administrations have done it. But there is something different in the approach that this administration is taking. And by the way, I think the government is doing what it has to, which is not getting into a mudslinging contest publicly. John Healey being in Washington with other officials is an important part of trying to understand the US position and maintain some kind of link. The challenge that they will face is that I don't think the US sees, or at least Trump sees, any intrinsic value in alliances and partnerships. And that's why everyone has now got to think really hard, well, what do we actually bring to relations with the US in hard terms? It's in their interest to spend more, but they will also have to think about where they don't just have policy differences, but fundamental differences in philosophy.
So plenty for the likes of you, and to a much lesser extent me, to be chewing over in the months and quite probably years ahead. Matthew, thank you. That was so helpful. Matthew Savill, Director of Military Sciences at the Royal United Services Institute. It is 10 minutes to 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Are we crossing live now to North London, or are we are we crossing live to North London, or are we taking a break? We're taking a break, and then the Mayor of London will be able to tell us, hopefully, about the results are in, if you like. The scores are in on the ULEZ expansion.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:53. City Hall has published a new report into the estimated reduction of nitrogen oxides in 2024 compared with what it would have been if Sadiq Khan's policy had not gone ahead. That policy, of course, being the ULEZ expansion, which was extraordinarily fractious and controversial. And Sir Sadiq Khan joins me now. Why are we focusing, or at least in the report I've seen, on Sutton, Croydon and Merton and Bromley and Harrow?
Well, it might just be, James, good morning, that we've seen massive improvements in those areas, a reduction of 15% plus in poison in nitrogen dioxide, but also these were the boroughs, some of them, who objected the most and even took me to court unsuccessfully. And so it's good to see the residents of those boroughs, notwithstanding the political decisions taken by their council leaders, benefiting from the world's largest clean air zone. And just to give your listeners an idea of the report published today, is being analysed and peer-reviewed by experts from Imperial College, from Germany, Belgium, France, indeed York University. And what it shows is the ULEZ is working. A reduction in nitrogen dioxide by 27% across London, nitrogen oxides by 36% across London, and PM2.5, particulate matter 2.5, by 31% in outer London. So that will lead to hopefully fewer premature deaths, few people because of air pollution being diagnosed with asthma, suffering heart disease, lung cancer, suffering strokes, and also being diagnosed with early dementia.
How measurable is that, do you think? Because it's a bit of the curse of the politician in some ways is when you engage in preventative measures, the win isn't quite as obvious as it is when you are engaging in corrective measures.
Good question. So a number of things we've done. So one is in terms of the causes of air pollution. And by the way, the WHO say no level of air pollution is safe. We compared the improvements in London in terms of air quality with the rest of England. The improvement has been faster in London. In fact, now in outer London, the area is as good as the rest of England. But we are now hearing anecdotal evidence, which we'll be able to measure in a few years' time, from GPs, notice a difference, from A&Es, from those respiratory units across London, from parents with young children already starting to see improvements in relation to the air we breathe in London. And the other thing that fills me with huge satisfaction is we also independently analysed the impact in outer London on footfall and on retail expenditure and on leisure expenditure. In fact, footfall went up in outer London, no negative impact on retail expenditure or leisure expenditure. So it wasn't true when people predicted the ULEZ would be a disaster for shops and businesses in outer London.
Speaking of anecdotes, GB's been in touch to say my in-laws visit us in Sutton from France every few months, and they mentioned without even being asked that they'd noticed how much cleaner the air is here. I'll be checking to make sure that hasn't been sent in by one of your team in the course of the morning. But of course, speaking of fact-checking, the reason why you stress the peer-reviewed nature of this report is because an awful lot of critics of ULEZ over time have claimed that figures are massaged or that research is unreliable. They don't seem to be going down that path yet, but Colin Smith, the leader of Bromley Council is adamant that there has been a huge financial expense for people, that businesses have had to buy new vehicles, that care networks have been destroyed, that people have had to change their jobs when they didn't really want to for a scheme, or rather buying vehicles that they didn't want or need.
Oh, look, poor Colin. I mean, he lost hundreds of thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money taking me to court unsuccessfully. He predicted ULEZ would be a disaster wrongly, and now he's just telling untruths. The good news is City Hall themselves, with support from the voters, spent a lot of money supporting businesses and families make that transition to a compliant vehicle, and we have now in London fewer non-compliant vehicles. In fact, now 97% of our vehicles are compliant. But actually, if you are driving a vehicle that's a polluting vehicle, you yourself are breathing in poison. The kids in the back are breathing in the poison. You yourself may have to phone in sick because of the pollutants you're breathing in, and those around you are breathing in poison. And I suspect, if you look back in the history books, 60 years ago, there'd be people saying smoking's not bad for you. Tobacco's okay. Don't believe those doom merchants saying smoking is bad. And if you go further back, the Great Smog probably wasn't causing problems to people like Colin Smith.
I think that the reason why people now want me to turn your attention to the London Underground, where air quality is still bad, is because the accusation is that you only ever did this to raise money from all the vehicles that weren't compliant and all the people that have been issued with tickets. So what can you do, and what are you doing about improving the quality of air on the London Underground?
Well, just to reassure your listeners, dust emissions on the underground are not the same as, particularly about nitrogen dioxide, nitrogen oxides overground.
Right.
So we've checked with the HSC, the Health and Safety Executive. We're within the legal limits in relation to dust emissions. But the good news, we've managed to reduce dust emissions by 21% on the platforms of the underground and more than 15% in the driver's cabin of the underground. And we're making even more progress to reduce dust emissions on the underground. So it's not true to say you can compare dust emissions with those emissions on the surface, which were breaching WHO guidelines. But in fact, ULEZ is not about making money. In fact, I've said 97% of the vehicles are compliant. They don't pay a penny for driving around London, but see the benefits of cleaner air.
So when it's fully successful, there will be no money raised from it at all? Is it a slightly anomalous state of affairs? Absolutely. And you can look at the TfL budgets year on year. ULEZ brings in less money, but also we've invested a huge amount in the cameras, in the IT kit, in making sure we've got the right staff trained, in the scrappage scheme, which has led to the hundreds of thousands of vehicles being taken off our streets. And we know we'll be saving money in the medium to long term, indeed in the short term, for the NHS, for social care, and for those businesses who won't be having staff ringing in sick because of asthma. I know you're short of time, but since you were last on this programme, Donald Trump has called Zelensky a dictator. That was just a couple of hours after you left the studio, actually. I don't know whether he was waiting. Starmer has been to the White House. Trump has humiliated Zelensky in the Oval Office. And as we speak, military intelligence and US aid to Ukraine is suspended. Did you see any of this coming?
Look, we live in unprecedented times, as Matthew Savill was just saying, certainly in my adult lifetime. Russia's invaded Georgia, annexed Crimea, invaded Ukraine again 3 years ago. Look, what does Russia want? They want the USA to be disentangled and separate from Europe. They want them to leave NATO. They want us, now that we're outside the European Union, to be separate from Europe and America. So I support Keir Starmer in relation to trying to have closer alignment with EU and European leaders, staying close to President Trump. And I understand why the government thinks it's in the national interest to have a state visit from President Trump. Unlike Vice President J.D. Vance, I know we have freedom of speech and freedom of expression in London and the UK. So I suspect Londoners will be exercising their right of free speech when President Trump comes to the UK on the state visit.
So you're comfortable with the invitation remaining in situ?
Well, listen, I can see the national interest in that invitation being made, but also I'm really proud we live in a democracy, unlike what some may think, and that means Londoners and others across our great country will be exercising their right to free speech.
Sir Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, thank you very much indeed. Speaking to us live from a primary school in North London, wherever you've heard, the numbers are in, and the ULEZ expansion has seen the biggest pollutant cut in the boroughs that were most violently opposed to it. 1 minute after 12 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 5 minutes after 12 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've got quite a lot to get through this hour. It's a nice Friday afternoon phone in for you imminently, but there's quite a lot of other stuff to get through as well. Not least, I don't know if you heard the former Reform candidate who rang in earlier this week to a really helpful contribution to the programme, actually, about his lack of love, really, for the current leader, and a reminder that when Richard Tice was in charge, that the party was still polling pretty well. Well, he was up in Scotland this week, greeting the defection of two councillors from, I don't know from which party, but to the Reform Party, and this is, I think, evidence that Reform is becoming a really slick and serious political operator. Tice is currently the deputy leader. He's not the one that launched an attack yesterday on the current leader, which is currently still Nigel Farage, and I think 30p Lee is in special measures, actually. But anyway, here's Richard Tice on the stump in Scotland.
Who are your defectors today and where are they from?
So I've got John and Ross, and
what
they are from.
Names? I don't know John and Ross.
Are you going to challenge me on everything, or are you going to ask a policy
Challenge
question?
on that.
Well, I'm answering policy questions.
What are their surnames?
I'm asking policy questions about how we make people better off.
My question.
Good.
My choice of question.
And John and Ross.
To you is what are
and
their full
John and
names?
Ross.
And what councils are they from?
John and Ross.
What councils are they from?
Next question.
You cannot tell me who your council defectors are today. Why not? Do you know anything about Scottish politics? You can't even name your own members up here.
We've got 10,000 members. I don't know all 10,000 members.
You don't know their surnames. We called a press conference with these guys and you can't even tell me their names.
It's funny because that's why he was in Scotland. The press conference was to celebrate the defection of these two councillors, who I happen to know are called John and Ross. But you would expect him to know their surnames. And also, a little bit Trumpish there, trying to tell journalists what questions they should and shouldn't be answering. The man channeling. Is this, I don't know if this is a little bit of kind of stereotyping, but I was going to say Tom Gordon there from the Scottish Daily Mail channeling Taggart and also Malcolm Tucker, but I don't know if that's something I'd say if I was Scottish, but I've said it now. With thanks to Andrew Learmonth from the Herald for providing us with that audio. That's his full name, Andrew Learmonth from the Herald, and Tom Gordon of the Scottish Daily Mail. Can we do it once more, shall we? Yeah, why not? Come on, it's Friday.
Who are your defectors today and where are they from?
So I've got John and Ross, and
what
they are from.
Names? I don't know John and Ross.
Are you going to challenge me on everything, or are you going to ask a policy question?
On that.
Well, I'm answering policy questions.
What are their surnames?
I'm asking policy questions about how we make people better off.
My question.
Good.
My choice of question.
And John and Ross.
To you is what are
and
their full
John and
names?
Ross.
And what councils are they from?
John and Ross.
What councils are they from?
Next question.
You cannot tell me who your council defectors are today. Why not? Do you know anything about Scottish politics? You can't even name your own members up here.
We've got 10,000 members. I don't know all 10,000 members.
You don't know their surnames. We called a press conference with these guys and you can't even tell me their names.
It's pretty bad not knowing their surnames, but also not knowing what council it was that John Gray and Ross Lambie had defected in. Tory councillors in Renfrewshire and South Lanarkshire defecting from the Tories to Reform. I don't know how you turn a victory into a humiliation. I don't know how you turn a political coup into a political humiliation, but there you go, he managed. Tony says, don't worry, James, we don't all sound like Taggart, just the massive majority. It is. And Steve says, do you know, Steve, I just walked past him when I came into the studio this morning. I want to make it absolutely clear. Jonathan Ross has not defected to the Reform Party. It was John and Ross. And if you're asking what their surnames are, then frankly, you're part of the problem, not the solution. And you should be, I don't know, don't be so woke. Surnames are so woke, aren't they? You've got to get rid of it. Who needs surnames? I hate these stories. I love them because we always have great chats off the back of them, but I hate them because I really do believe, like Caroline Bingley and Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, that there is no enjoyment like reading. We've all suffered. This is not what the phone-in is about our attention span suffering slightly. I don't know what we're going to do on Monday, Online Safety Day. I think that comment we just heard there in the news about families actually fighting over social media, the difficulties that you have, if you like, getting your teenagers to do what you want them to do in the context of social media, causing all sorts of explosions and ructions. That might be something that we come back to on Monday, but I don't know. It's early days. You know how I work. I shall decide what we're doing on Monday's programme at 2 minutes after 10 on Monday. But I acknowledge that the lure of social media and other short-term attention span feeders has made it a little bit harder to read. Do you do this? If you've got a book on the go, do you now sometimes check your news feed or check your socials? So you've got your book there and your phone there and you're reading your book and you reach for your phone. Do you do that? Didn't used to do that, did you? You didn't do that when your phone was slightly less exciting. No one ever put their phone down to play a game of Snake or send a text message, I don't think. But you do. So we're all susceptible to this. But what we're not, I don't think, all part of, well, I know we're not. That's not an opinion. It's counting. 40% of Britons haven't read a book in a year. And I don't know, how far back that goes, how many Britons have not read a book in ever, for example, or haven't read a book in 10 years or 20 years. I'm going to include audiobooks in this. The survey showed that readers still valued physical books over e-books, which I can tell you has shocked the publishing industry. The publishing industry was bracing for huge changes and huge problems in their whole business model, because when e-readers came out, everyone thought, well, the traditional book, the physical book, if you like, is dead. But it really, really hasn't turned out like that. It's a YouGov survey with 23% saying they'd read or listened to between 1 and 5 books in the past year. A further 10% reading between 6 and 10 titles. There you go. I make the top 9% who've read between 20 and 50 books in the last year. Do you get extra points if you've written one? You should do. No? Oh, all right. So I don't want to be snobbish about this. The two things that annoy me the most about faux snobbishness, like reverse snobbery or even snobbery, is food and reading. I hate it. I hate it when it's so middle class, you're having quinoa. It really boils my bunions, because it somehow sends out messages to a bit like the caller earlier who got teased by his own parents for brushing his teeth. Oh, I don't know if they said middle class. They might have cast aspersions on his sexuality instead. But he brushes his teeth. Ooh, get you, Princess Tippy Toes, brushing your teeth with actual toothpaste. You see how reductive and how stupid that is. It's the same with food, and I've done it myself. Muesli munching, I used to say. Muesli munching, sandal wearing, probably knitting a hat out of your own armpit hair. What's wrong with muesli? It's really good for you, especially if you need more fibre in your diet. It's not the best example. The best example is when Jamie Oliver was trying to revolutionise school meals. He got accused. He's a publican's son from Essex. He got accused of being some sort of mincing, mealy-mouthed, middle-class cliché who was riding roughshod over traditional working-class values like scurvy, rickets and malnutrition, not to mention, of course, the most obvious example, obesity. And books. Got a book. Ooh, hello. All right, Professor. It's just so stupid to deny people physical health by turning food into something that's subject to ludicrous, faux, class-based criticisms. Couscous is really nice, you know? Couscous is one of the things I used to do, probably. Say, ooh, couscous. All right, Mr. Couscous. Ooh, couscous, is it? Cuckoo. It's delicious. In fact, Jamie has a wonderful recipe for it where you just soak it in vinegar and oil and chop in loads of peppers, red peppers, and look it up. I think it's in his first book, actually. And then mental health or just life. Your life will be better if you eat well and read a lot. It just will. And here we are. 40% of Britons haven't read a single book in a year. It's extraordinary, isn't it? And I want to help. I don't want to open this up listen, I know that some people can't read. That's why we're including, or find it very hard to read, dyslexia and stuff. It's not, I always worry when I say things like this that it makes me sound like a right old tyrant. But if we're doing a phone-in about why you haven't read a book in a year, because you're dyslexic is not an answer to the question. We're talking about people who are choosing not to. The difference, which we discussed last Friday, actually, what was the context? In school refusal or school non-attendance, the difference between won't and can't is crucial. And of course, audiobooks are part of this research anyway. So there are lots of opportunities to consume a book, shall we say, to consume a book. Whichever of your senses it may be. Of course, with Braille, it could even be touch, couldn't it? So it's about consuming a book, not per se reading a book. 40%. I don't know what I can do for you today if you're one of these people. I mean, I don't know what I'll do if you ring me. I've often toyed with the idea of trying to become some sort of book doctor. So I'll quiz you about what your interests are, and then using my capacious knowledge of the literary canon, I'll make a recommendation about a book that you might like. But then you'll probably start moaning about not being able to afford it or something. That's not a criticism, I fully appreciate it. And I'll say, well, go to the library. Did I tell you what happened in our part of town on one of the local... You know, when they start building new stuff in a town and some people are cross about it, sometimes they've got good reason to be because, it makes property harder to afford for the families that grew up there. Sometimes it's just because people hate change. When they announced that they were opening a bookshop in my neck of the woods, it didn't last very long, sadly, so maybe they're celebrating. They announced they were opening a bookshop in my neck of the woods. Someone responded on the local residents forum by saying, we've already got a bookshop, thank you very much. It's called the library. You just sort of think, what is happening in your brain that you think that a bookshop is a bad thing to have in your town? And actually, Brentford, the library, like a lot of libraries, because of council funding problems, isn't open a lot of the time. But I digress. I don't know that me being a book doctor, I think that would be a little bit pretentious. Or not pretentious, it'd be a little bit pompous. Would it? I don't know. What I really like are the stories of the books that broke the dam. The book that actually turned you from a non-reader to a reader. And the story about how it ended up in your hands. I'm going to set the bar quite high on this because it is one of the favourite calls I've ever taken on the programme. Shall I do a hook and tease on this one? Shall we see if anybody has been paying enough attention over the last 10 years to know what story I'm about to tell? I've told it a few times. Yeah, go on. Let's take a break and then we'll come back. I'll set up the story and I'll ask you about the book that broke the bank, the one that actually burst the dam, that helped you go from being someone who didn't think they were a reader to someone who was a reader. I don't need many calls, but I will need some. But the story I will begin with is one I have told you before. Let's see if any of you can recall which one it is. It's 12:18.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 20 minutes after 12 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where nobody knows this. That's fantastic. It must have been a long time ago. Kemal spoilt it. Kemal just came in right at the end and got it right. So it was a fella who had never read a book, I don't think since school. And he joined the army. He was a squaddie in the army, and they were out on exercises. And they come back from their PT, physical training, and they see the sergeant major on the lookout for what would be laughably called a volunteer. And on the army base where he was staying, there was a building he'd never been into, a porter cabin, if memory serves. Although I might be painting pictures now in your mind. Do you know they say the pictures are much better on the radio than they are anywhere else? And he, in order to avoid the laser-like gaze of the sergeant major who was looking for a, quotes, volunteer, end quotes, our correspondent ducked into the library, ducked into the building. He walked through the first door he could see in the hope of avoiding the sergeant major. And it turned out to be the library. To my shame, I can't remember what the bloody book was. Can you, Kemal? You're the clever clogs in this relationship. Can you remember what the book was? And he literally just picked it up because what else is he going to do while he's hiding from the sergeant major? And in that moment, everything changed. In that moment, he became a reader. He became a reader. The book, just a little bit of luck, a little bit of serendipity, I presume, because I can think of a few books he might have picked up which would have put him off reading for life. But I love that story. I love that story. It doesn't actually matter what the story he picked up was, because his story became the story that I love about the story of him picking up a story. This is a multi-storied hour of radio. I hope you noticed. The other thing that occurred to me is that if I did do the book doctor thing that I mentioned to you a moment ago, I could do this. So here's one from Andrew, who's in Richmond. Anything for a geeky anaesthetist whose wife wants him to stop making medicine my whole personality, asks Andrew in Richmond. And I'd go like this. I'd stroke my chin a bit. And I'd say, well, I mean, I think you might enjoy a little bit of Jane Austen, or, of course, why not try and bring some of your medicine into your literary pursuits and sort of meet yourself halfway. And then, so I'd give it a couple of minutes with every caller on James, I like war games and marzipan. Could you recommend a book for me? And I'd take on, you know what I'd do at the end of every call? Yeah, I'd try and flog one of my own. I'd say, well, I think that How They Broke Britain would be the perfect book for you, having learnt about your personality. What's that you say? Oh, yes. How to Be Right by No, so I won't be doing that, but I will read out the jokes that you beat me to. Les has been in touch to say the last book I read was a title called How They Broke Britain by some unknown. I hear it did quite well. And Jill points out that so many people are working 12 hours a day and then have chores to do in order to keep a roof over their head. I'm too knackered at the end of the week, and whilst I would love to sit and read a book, I don't have the time. That's fine. I mean, no one's criticising you, Jill. All right, I will criticise you a bit. Of course you have the time. Even if you're knackered, you can read 2 pages and then you nod off and you'll have better dreams than you would have done if you hadn't. If you've got time to watch the telly, you've got time to read a book. But now I do sound like a pompous ass, so I will stop. What is the book that turned you from someone who didn't think they were a reader into somebody who is? What rescued you, in other words, from being one of the 40% of Britons who haven't read a book in a year? And I wonder if we need a side order. The book that got you back... Well, let's see how we get on with this. But we've also got the book that got you back into it. So you were a reader, and then you suddenly realised you hadn't opened a book for 5 years. What got you back? What are the books that we can really credit with having either ignited or reignited a love of literature? All right? I love these things. You know I do. Stephen's in Kingston. Stephen, what have you got?
Hi, James. Good afternoon. Hi there. So for me, I was at university. I was like the most reluctant reader. I did a BA, but I kind of like dip into a book and read as little as possible. And I just couldn't concentrate on it.
Oh, okay. So you'd sometimes try, would you, and just find yourself going, sack it.
Exactly that. Yeah. So I do the minimum, and then I read H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, which is an incredible book. And it just, the thing that really got me about it was the simplicity. You'll probably be able to recall the Latin phrase for when a disastrous situation is suddenly saved by something very quick.
No.
You're
very kind. You're very kind. I haven't got a Scooby-Doo.
No, okay. Someone will text it in. Anyway.
If I was Jacob Rees-Mogg, I'd make something. In vino veritas is what you're referring to, I think, Stephen.
Okay. Maybe, yeah. But because it's exactly what would happen. The Martians die because they have, spoiler alert, because they have no immunity to the microbes on Earth. And what's so incredible about that is you cannot rewrite that with any sort of modern literature or fiction. You're going to have to find a more complex way to defeat the Martians. Because H.G. Wells has already written the way it would happen.
He beat you to it. Why did you pick it up if you didn't think of yourself as a reader? How did it end up in your hands?
Because I was living in Kingston. I still live in Kingston or that area, and it's set in Woking, so the Martians land on Horshall Common. And
this is the perfect answer.
It's a vivid guide to southwest London. So bye, please. I think the Martians actually make their way up all the way to Richmond at one point. So
I wish you'd been around at the time, and they could have put that quote on the cover. So, War of the Worlds, which again, spoiler alert, is about an alien invasion, and then on the cover you've got George Orwell saying an absolute masterpiece, and Stephen in Kingston saying an excellent guide to local culture. No, exactly. An excellent guide to southwest London. I love that. Is it Deus Ex Machina? Is that what you were thinking of?
I still can't recall. I have seen it. But
I'm going to just say random Latin phrases, although here's an English phrase because you reminded me of Jacob Rees-Mogg. True or false? In May of 2018, Jacob Rees-Mogg wrote in the Times, President Trump will be our greatest ally after Brexit.
I'm assuming that's true.
You're assuming correctly. I love that. That is why we're doing this topic, because I need to ask the question, why did you pick it up if you didn't think you were a reader? So it's just set in Woking, obviously. So that's why I need a book. It's a local book for local people, is what it is. Steve's in Lincoln. Steve, what have you got?
I've got a Ice Station by Matthew Riley, James.
I don't know it. Tell me more.
It's an absolutely ridiculous book in terms. It's boys' own stuff. It really takes you back to the Eagle and the sort of soldier heroes, if you like.
Yep.
Scarecrow is the main character. Matthew Riley, the whole series of things on Scarecrow, and it's just absolutely ridiculous with a small force of 6 people taking on submarines, taking on invading Russian forces. Even the Brits. I mean, it was...
I want you to stop saying it's ridiculous. It sounds absolutely splendid. And until you picked that up, if I'd said, Steve, are you a reader? You'd have said, no, James, not really, not at all.
No, I was commuting between Woking and London.
Are you joking?
No, I'm not.
This is getting surreal. So this is turning into a phone-in about Woking.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
What is it about Woking that makes people want to read books? Yeah, go on. You were commuting.
I just dived into the bookshop on Waterloo Station
because you thought I'm sick of staring out the window on the journey home.
Exactly, and I just saw this book. I thought, I'll give that a go, Ice Station, and I didn't put it down for 2 days. And
wow!
I think all my friends that I've handed it to exactly the same thing. Even got my son to read it and start him reading. It's just a real page turner for boys' own stuff.
And did it break the seal, so to speak? Did you then become more of a? I mean, you moved on to other books and other writers.
Oh yeah, I think one of my favourites, Louis de Bernier.
Yes, gosh, yes.
And his series, and certainly the dark South American books that
magical realism. I think is it magical realism they call it? The sort of Gabriel Garcia Marquez and that lot. I love that, and it's there for everybody. You just need something, whatever it might be, that just makes you go, yeah. Do you know what? I will. Oh, why not? Yeah, I'll give it a go. I love that. 2 brilliant stories. Who'd have thought Woking would be the unifying factor in these moments, these episodes? It's coming up to 12:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Tim Humphrey is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 33 minutes after 12. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I mentioned to you earlier that one of the hallmarks of fascism is an attempt to erase history, an attempt to rewrite history. And one of the reasons why you would know that might be because you've read fiction. You don't have to be reading it in history books or in non-fiction books. The Hunger Games is a pretty good depiction of what a fascistic society looks like. But I told you earlier that the Defense Department is purging all evidence of diversity, equity and inclusion, including photographs of the first women to pass Marine infantry training and a World War II Medal of Honor recipient, and even the Enola Gay aircraft, presumably because they think that the presence of the word gay contributes to the diversity, equity and inclusion agenda. But it will be black people, Hispanic people, women and gay people. All of these people will be just removed from history if this process continues. And there's another story in the news, because another element of the fascistic project is to create service only to the leader, not to the government or to the state, or to conflate leader with state. And some of the questions, the loyalty test now that potential job candidates are being given if they want to get government jobs, effectively these would be civil service jobs. They're being asked, which of Trump's executive orders is your favourite? They're being asked, would you be willing to serve as a spokesperson for mass deportations? And crucially, perhaps, they're being asked who won the 2020 presidential election. So if you're applying for a job in Donald Trump's, or I beg your pardon, if you're applying for a job in the United States Civil Service and a Trump loyalist has been installed to vet the process or to run the vetting process, what do you think the correct answer is to the question of who won the 2020 presidential election? Do you think the correct answer is the correct answer, or do you think the correct answer is a blatant lie that Donald Trump himself has continued to trumpet? I'm very glad to see that the phrase Trump derangement syndrome seems to have disappeared from public discourse, because either everybody's got it or the people who warned what Trump represented have turned out to have been right all along. Wouldn't it be annoying if it was the same people who turned out to be right about Brexit and Boris Johnson and the rest of it? God, imagine how smug they'd be and how humiliated and embarrassed their critics would be. Yeah, right. 12:36 is the time. Oz Katerji is in Kyiv. He's been incredibly helpful to us since the outbreak of war, and it struck me yesterday, actually, and it struck Eleanor and I, that it would be a timely moment to find out where he is and what he's seeing, specifically, really, Oz, with regard to Donald Trump's latest decisions regarding Ukraine. Most obviously, I suppose, it's the hat trick, isn't it? The triumvirate of terribleness, the suspension of aid, the suspension of military intelligence, and the description of Volodymyr Zelensky as a dictator. So how has this gone down among Ukrainians?
I mean, I think there are a lot of Ukrainians who are shocked and completely bewildered by these events that are taking place. When Donald Trump won his second election, one of the first things I said in response to it was that Europe now stands totally alone, facing the greatest threat to its security since the annexation of the Rhineland. And I don't say that lightly. I'm not just drawing Second World War comparisons just to kind of, exaggerate the threat posed by Russia. The threat is very real. We're witnessing it every day. We have more people dead today, 2 more killed, 24 injured in Russian attacks across the country, launched nearly 200 drones, nearly 70 missiles. This is just a never-ending, relentless bombardment of Ukrainian cities, and the decision made by the Trump administration to pause intelligence sharing, to pause military aid, is having a cost already in Ukrainian lives. Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian civilians are dying for these decisions. And Trump there's no defense for this. It's not Trump trying to save lives or be a peacemaker. This is just straight up nakedly pro-Russian position from the US government. And it's time that Europe really recognizes this threat and moves to act towards it. Now, that's not to say there's no benefit to diplomacy. I'm not going to attack Macron and Starmer and Trudeau and the world leaders who are desperately trying to manage their relationship with Washington. They kind of have no choice but to do that. You can either go in and antagonize Trump and make things worse, or you can try and appeal to his ego and try and get some concessions out of them. You're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't. So I understand that, and I understand the position that Ukraine is in, with Zelensky, apologizing for something he has no valid reason to apologize for the berating that he was on the receiving end of from J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. But this is the position now. You've got Western allies running around trying to appease a pro-Russian US president, and you've got the country that's valiantly fighting off an invasion, being forced into an even more difficult position than it was already in.
I stop using words like extraordinary and unprecedented, but I think they're the only words that fit. One thing I don't know, one of the many things I don't know, Oz, is whether or not there is an audience for this at all in Ukraine. There are plenty of people in this country, most obviously Nigel Farage, who've been very open about their unbounded admiration for Vladimir Putin and, of course, for Donald Trump as well. Is there a caucus in Ukraine of people who will welcome this noise from the White House? You can still hear the champagne corks popping in the Kremlin, but apart from Trump's tightest of inner circles, there's not a great deal of celebration or approval of this in the United States. There's certainly not among the UK population. Is there a sort of Kremlin-facing opposition that is audible in Ukraine, even in times of war?
I mean, look, there are pro-Kremlin Ukrainian figures, but since the war began, since the full-scale invasion began, any kind of position of prominence they had in the Ukrainian discourse is completely gone. Right. So look, if you were to look at polling, they'd probably be in the low percentages, probably below 10% of people who are explicitly pro-Russian, following the full-scale invasion. Again, you'll have to check that the Kyiv Institute of Sociology regularly puts out polls on issues like this, and you'll be able to see the number. And I do trust the polling here. Ukraine is still a vibrant democracy. You can go out in the street and protest. You can call Zelensky any name under the sun. You're not going to get arrested for doing so, unlike Russia, where you can't even use the word war without ending up with a 10-year prison sentence. So yeah, they exist, but really they don't have any position in society anymore, and the people really speak as one voice. Now, there are varied opinions when it comes to just what kind of peace deal, just what kind of concessions Ukraine has to make. There's lots and lots and lots of different opinions in that general field. But when it comes to fighting this existential war against Russia, people are speaking really as one voice. And again, the point that the Ukrainian government keeps banging on about is security guarantees. Many Ukrainians now would potentially express some sort of support for trading land for peace. Now, again, as unpalatable as it is for most Ukrainians, there are a sizable chunk of people that would believe that. But even those people only believe that if they can guarantee that Russia will never invade again. And that's not being offered by the US. It's still not being offered by Europe. And the Russians, absolutely, the only agreement they're interested in is one that allows them to invade Ukraine at will in the future. And that's the situation that we're facing now.
It may not need to, because Politico has reported that 4 senior members of Donald Trump's entourage have held secret discussions with people like Yulia Tymoshenko, the former leader, the one that got slung out.
Sure. Now, I actually spoke to several Ukrainian MPs, did interviews with them yesterday to figure out what the general position was. And the opposition parties and the government parties are all saying the same thing. And Petro Poroshenko, one of the opposition figures that the US administration reached out to, himself published a statement saying the same thing. We're not interested in elections. We don't want wartime elections. I have all of my criticisms of Zelensky, but we're not trying to oust him. Wow. And really, Zelensky represents the same thing we want, which is security guarantees to prevent a further Russian invasion.
That's incredible.
All the opposition politicians are saying that.
Well, what's significant, though, is the evidence of just how sly, if you like, the Trump administration is being, and just how Kremlin-friendly, really, as you earlier alluded to.
I mean, look, it's blatant at this point. They're not even hiding it very well. And, you've got these figures like Keith Kellogg and Rubio, who I just don't know what they're even doing in the administration. They clearly don't represent the views of Donald Trump. And the more they debase themselves towards his position, they're not going to get anything out of it. You could probably make the same criticisms towards Starmer and Macron, saying that debasing yourselves in front of Trump won't give you the kind of results that you're hoping for. Again, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't at the moment. So the best thing Ukraine can hope for is that Zelensky can use his diplomatic prowess to try and get Trump to agree to some kind of conditions that would help Ukraine going forward. But really what we're looking at is multiple decisions by the White House on aid, on intelligence sharing, that are basically pro-Russian positions. And I don't think you can describe them as anything else.
No, nobody is. People who've been watching these matters for a long time would normally fight shy of words like alliance. We moved very quickly on this program, Oz, from appeasing to aligning, and now we've probably gone further from aligning to actively agitating in favour of, or actively helping, aiding, abetting. The second story and the final question for you is, again, evidence of the pressure that's being brought to bear on Zelensky in particular and Ukraine in general. And I'll read it to you again, as I did the last one. Donald Trump is planning to revoke temporary legal status for some 240,000 Ukrainians who fled the conflict with Russia, according to a senior administration official. This has been confirmed by Reuters.
Yeah, I mean, look, I understand that the US administration has denied that report by Reuters, but Reuters have very solid reporting on this.
They've got the official responsible and 3 other sources that they've...
And the White House continuously lies about these things. I think, look, the way I would like to end this show is I'd just like to ask your audience, because I know LBC has a really varied audience, and there are going to be some people sat in their cars driving to work or whatever who are listening to this and think, I don't agree with this. I think Donald Trump is just pushing for peace. And my question is, after looking at the intelligence sharing, these refugee stories, etc., 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 if Donald Trump was pro-Russian and he was trying to disguise his policies by doing things in a pro-Russian manner, but trying to, frame them in a different way, what would he have done differently from all of the things he's done now?
We'll make a phone-in host of you yet, Oz Katerji. We'll make a phone-in host of you yet, because that is precisely the question, isn't it? Exactly. I mean, what would he have done differently? What you could almost say, what's he done so far that the Kremlin would disapprove of?
So I've got one prediction to put on your show, and you can throw it back at my face in 4 years' time if it doesn't come to fruition. But I think we will move to a place over the next couple of years in which Donald Trump tries to put economic sanctions on Ukraine. That's where I think that we will reach. I think he'll lift sanctions from Russia and put them on Ukraine. That's how serious I think the situation is. And I could be wrong on this. And again, I hope I'm wrong on this. But this is the direction of travel that I see the US government heading into, trying to pressure Ukraine through economic measures. That they still haven't hit those levers yet.
Yeah.
But those levers are basically the only thing left once all the military aid is cut.
And of course, it's not even day 50 yet. Oz Katerji, stay safe. Thank you very much. Oz, correspondent in Ukraine, speaking to us from Kyiv, as he's done on a number of occasions since this war started. It's 12:47. We've got a couple of more book calls. I've got to give you a quick heads up on this week's Full Disclosure. And there's almost certainly something else to do as well.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10 to 1. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I like this from Sheena. I can't say that out loud, really. I mean, I'm not going to. I'm going to say, Jeepers Creepers, she writes. Not even 50 days. It feels like months, she adds. You're right. I mean, it's barely a week. It's a week today that he tried to attack Zelensky in the Oval Office. A week. It's been a week. What was it? Was it Harold Wilson? A week is a long time in politics. You weren't kidding, Hazza. You were not kidding, were you? And there it is. Back to books. Just the question of what broke the dam for you. 40% of Brits haven't read a book in a year. What stopped you being one of them? What was the single book that turned you from a non-reader, a self-described non-reader, into someone who likes reading? Steve's in Hockley. Steve, what have you got?
Hello, James. Nice to speak to you. So yeah, I hadn't read a book until I was in my 30s, really, probably early 30s. Even prior to that in school, I think the only book I read because I was made to was Lot of Mice and Men.
I knew you were going to say that. I don't know. Every kid, every generation of mice and flipping men, isn't it? Crikey. Go on, carry on. It's a good book.
It wasn't too bad, but it is a good book, yeah. But I didn't pick up a book or a newspaper or anything until my early 30s, and I just happened to be around a friend's house, and he had a book by a guy called Brian Lumley. And it was part of the Necroscope series, and it's, without going into detail, it's fictional stuff, supernatural kind of thing. Anyway, I just liked the cover of it, read the back of it, and just said to my mate, would you mind if I just borrowed this? I'm just going to give it a go. And that was a complete turning point for me. This was before the days of Kindle and stuff like that. So I scoured the local libraries if there was a series of books, and I went right back to the start, and I started them all again. And then there was some additional series he'd done after that were all linked in around alternate universes and vampires, but I was starting to research it. When I used to read them, because of the way they was written, because I've got quite a vivid imagination, the pictures that I could conjure up, it just took me to another place.
Proper escapism, isn't it? And
massively.
Yeah, it's like being awake and dreaming sometimes when you're really in the zone with a brilliant writer, especially a fantasy author. Actually, sometimes it can be an alternative universe that you're stepping into.
Well, it's got to a stage now where I do read every day. So before I go to bed, I'll always have a couple of chapters of whatever I'm reading at the time.
That's
get
lovely.
yourself to sleep.
I love
that. But before the Kindle came along and the lit background, I used to have a little tiny torch pen that I used, little pen torch. So I used to balance on my shoulder to read the books. And it would be when my wife would be nudging me, going, "Are you going to turn that light off?" Yeah, and you go, "Yeah. I'll put it down now."
Any minute now.
And so. Yeah, exactly. Any chapter now.
One more chapter. Well, that's the
Exactly.
biggest compliment you can pay a writer, I think. The idea that I just can't put it down. Steve, thank you, mate. That was perfect. 12:53 is the time. I'm not going to take any more on this. We may return to it another day. My apologies to Chris, to Simon, to Niall, to John, to Kai, to Andrea, because we've got some news that we have to squeeze in, and I've also got a quick heads up on this week's Full Disclosure. Have we got time to do them both? How many minutes do you need, Natasha Clark?
40 seconds for a clip and then a quick 30 seconds to wrap up.
Right, here's Katie Tunstall on this week's Full Disclosure.
I was very lucky that I looked young.
Oh, of course.
I mean, because I was...
Just back to playing puck.
Yeah, I was 30 on Jules Holland, and people thought I was 21. And I was never compelled to sort of lie about my age because I was very proud of it. And I think that the experience that you gain over that time is really important and part of your story as a songwriter. So I don't want to hide that in any way. But I always had this visual in my mind where I was always a bit of a vicarious mountain climber through mum and dad. I'd never got into it, but I loved the culture around mountaineering. And
there's a lot of metaphors as well, isn't there?
There's tons of metaphor, and it's just such a crazy thing to want to do, which is the metaphor for wanting to be a musician. And I always imagine myself, and from all these hikes that I would do with my parents when I was younger, of hiking along this vertiginous single-person path along the edge of a mountain, the top ridge of a mountain, and you could fall off either side. And as I'm getting older, these young, sprightly mountaineers are coming up to the path each side of me and trying to take my place. And I would always say to myself, yeah, they might have the energy, but I've got the experience, and I've been up here a long time now, and I know what the dangers are, and I know what to look out for, and I know the direction I'm going in.
Okay.
And so I've got the experience up here, and they haven't. And so use that and just follow your gut. You know what you're doing. And I don't know. I mean, I look back at, honestly, I don't know how I had the resilience to keep persevering at it.
And how close did you come to knocking it on the head?
Weirdly, the time I remember nearly wanting to knock it on the head was when I did move to London.
Right.
And I got my publishing deal first as a writer under the very good advice of a mentor, Bobby Heatley from Edinburgh, who'd said, get signed as a writer first because the record business is brutal. And I did that, and it was good advice. But I remember I'd moved to Harlesden and I couldn't get a record deal. So I had my publishing deal. I desperately wanted to put a record out, and I couldn't get a record company interested. And I remember walking home from Willesden Junction, and I walked past the garden centre, and I just thought, I think I might just want to get a job at the garden centre.
Horticulturalist.
Yeah, and just do landscaping or something.
Yeah.
Like, do I really want to do this? And I've certainly had that thought several times over the last 20 years, for sure.
Wow. Except now you're doing it from the luxury of having cracked it and thinking maybe I'll do something else as opposed to...
Believe me, James, it still happens. I still just go, God, this is brutal.
She's lovely, really, really talented as well. And the new musical Clueless, for which she has written the music, is an absolute joy. I didn't know what to expect, but it's just brilliant. It comes with 5 stars from me. I haven't got time to read out all the people crediting me with turning them back onto the joys of reading, but, modesty prevents. Natasha Clark is here with news of the online safety bill, or an amendment. Well, you tell me.
Yes, James. So we expect the government to, in principle, today back this new bill from a Labour MP. It's just going to take action on social media. Now, it was originally going to ban smartphones in schools. This has been watered down and taken out. But what it will do is task Sir Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer, to look in detail at the dangers of screen time and social media for kids, and look again at whether to raise the age of what is called digital consent from 13 to 16. And essentially that could mean kids under 16 may be at some point in the future banned from social media altogether. And we understand that it's likely that the government are going to back this idea in the House of Commons in the next sort of few minutes or so. It probably won't go to a vote. Here's Labour MP Josh McAllister speaking earlier in the Commons about the dangers of social media, saying that he thought it was rewiring children's brains.
Many of our children now spend their time captured by addictive social media and smartphone use, often sat alone, doom scrolling, being bombarded by unrealistic representations of life. communicating through asynchronous large group chats rather than through looking at facial expressions, eye contact, body language, learning to interact, moving less, smiling less, learning less, growing increasingly anxious and depressed. This rewiring of childhood has only one winner: the balance sheets of social media companies.
Some really punchy comments there from Josh McAllister, who's bringing forward this bill today. He's going into the government, but I think it's fair to say that MPs of all political persuasions really, really concerned about social media, about online use amongst children. And the government very much seem to finally be waking up to having a look at what they can do about it.
And all I'd add, well, two things, is that, of course, we're dedicating most of our programming on Monday to matters of online safety, so don't miss any of that. But be aware also, when he referenced there the billionaire owners of the social media platforms, they are the ones who are using their shills, their patsies and their puppets to pretend that this is a freedom of speech issue. So if you hear any British politicians or commentators claiming that their freedom of speech is compromised, they are doing the bidding of the social media billionaires who are desperate to continue consigning your children to a life of fewer smiles and less joy. That's it from me for another week. We'll do it all again, shall we, on Monday morning. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including Full Disclosure and James O'Brien Daily, the best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.